So how are you guys? I am back again with a very fun and exciting new video, which is, what if Naruto was raised by the legends of One Piece? Before video started, do like, share and subscribe to the channel and comment down your favorite part. Your one like and one subscribe motivate me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. So without any waste of time, now let's start the fanfic. In the East Blue resides a bustling port city on the Polestar Islands just out of sight of the impossible entrance to the world's strongest ocean, Reverse Mountain. This town was famous for resupplying the ships, marine and pirate alike, that planning on entering the Grand Line, a city of beginnings and ends, Logatown. One man was about to experience both, born in this bustling port as Galdi. Roger, he set out with his crew to conquer the world's strongest sea. His adventures became things of legend, everyone sounding impossible and yet were often the truth, having slain giants, destroyed fleets, met God and proved himself one of the strongest men in the world. The world came to know him as Gold Roger, the king of the pirates, the most wanted man in the world, but unknown to him was the fact that Gold Roger was dying. So in the last days of his life, Gold Roger surrendered himself to save his crew. So now in the blistering heat of the summer sun he was slowly marched through the crowd of onlookers to the city's main square where the newly erected execution platform was waiting to fulfill its purpose. Many rookie pirates and children that would become legends watched with confusion at the prisoner's composure, walking like a king to his coronation with a wide grin that seemed wrong for a man feared the world over. All those present were unable to look away as he slowly walked up the stairs to his death without a care in the world, his ever-present smile never wavering even as he stood before his executioners. "Any last words?" asked the taller of the two executioners, sweat visibly dripping from his face, terrified of the man before him as well as the heat of the summer sun. Roger slowly turned his head, his eyes hidden in the shadow of his brow. "Can you take these off?" he asked calmly, holding up his bound wrists. "It's chafing me. I cannot do that." Roger lowered his hands. "Why would I run away now?" he said, glancing at the nervous marine before sitting cross-legged between them, seeming as carefree as a child relaxing in the summer sun than a man facing his death. "Well, go ahead and finish it," he said, without a care on the world as the executioners readied their spears to strike at his heart. "Oi, Pirate King!" came a shout from the crowd, drawing everyone's gaze from the doomed man above them. "What did you do with your treasure? It's somewhere in the Grand Line, isn't it? You have it, don't you? The greatest treasure in the world. Insolent! Hold your tongue!" barked the taller of the two men poised to strike at Roger. The man ignored the executioner, continuing to shout at Roger, "Your one special treasure. One Piece." The crowd fell silent and turned when they heard the sound of laughter, seeing the Pirate King laughing despite this imminent death. "My treasure," he began, his voice carrying over the silence crowd. "All right, that's enough," barked his executioners, pulling their spears back to kill the world's most wanted man. "My wealth and treasure. If you want it, I'll let you have it. Look for it. I left it at that place," he cried out just as the blades drove into his heart. Roger looked up one last time, his smile never fading even as his life slipped away as the crowd cheered loudly for the beginning of the new era, an era of dreams and adventure. Unseen by the crowd who were celebrating Roger's death was a small ball of light, no larger than a pin, float gently down and landed over the fallen Pirate King's heart. Slowly, as the Marines came to carry him away, a trail of faint golden light drifted into the sky, going unnoticed by the departing crowd. A single Marine Vice Admiral saw the faint trail of light and smiled sadly, watching it slowly rise into the clear sky, the once brown hair graying around his temples and the deep wrinkles around his eyes, forehead and around the corner of his mouth showing his decline into old age and the end of his prime. He let out a brief laugh that caused the young Marines around him to jump in surprise but dismissed it as one of the Admiral's many eccentricities. "It seems that he has other plans for you, Roger. I just hope that wherever you go you find what you're looking for," the Vice Admiral thought as he turned away, to look at the dispersing crowd, knowing that in his death Roger had spite the Marines as only he could. "I just hope the world is ready for your legacy." 22 years later, the island of Marineford, the headquarters of the world's peacekeepers and home of justice, lay in ruin, where once a peaceful castle filled with disciplined recruits training tirelessly now lay broken with bodies of Marines and pirates alike scattered amidst the blood and rubble created from cannon and the monstrous strength of the men assembled in the War of the Best. One of those assembled stood before the Marines, a colossal man of immense strength and fortitude, his body destroyed from the numerous wounds that littered his powerful body. His guts roasted from having magma poured through a hole just beneath his heart, his face covered in blood with half of his famous crescent-white mustache that earned his name. Yet despite these grievous injuries that would have long since ended most men and the last of his life ebbed away, he still stood proud, defiant and unyielding against his foes. He spoke of the last time he saw his friend and rival Gold Roger and his message to him. He looked at the coward before him and at the two men who remained of Roger's time before throwing back his head and roared, "One Piece really exists." He roared in defiance for the entire world to hear. His eyes closed slowly as the last of his life left him, standing unyielding even in death. The world's strongest man, Edward Newgate, known to most as the dreaded Yonko Whitebeard, was dead, and with his death a new era of chaos began where common men took to the sea with renewed hope of discovering Roger's legendary treasure. Unseen to the combatants in this war of the best was a pale light that left Giant Man's body, departing into the sky into a hole in the world no bigger than Pinhead, leaving the world of grand oceans filled with wonders and terrors that defy all sense. Unknown location, unknown time. The world was white, long drained of the color that may have once filled the space lit by a light with no source. A single throne stood out in the vast space, over 10 foot tall, looking like it had been grown on the sea floor over 1,000 years, the aged coral shifting in color so it was impossible to say the color at any given time. Shells and barnacles clung to its rough surface while small fish and coruscations defying gravity as they swam around the throne or floated on an invisible current. Two glowing spheres slowly formed before the throne, slowly taking the form of two young men, one giant, a man with the body of a titan standing over 12 feet in height and made of thick slabs of solid muscle and sinew. He was dressed in loose light tan trousers tugged in high black combat boots with a regal purple sash tied around his waist, and a white captain's coat that reached down to just above his ankles hung open on his shoulders, revealing his muscular arms and torso with a single viscous scar lying over where his heart. A plain black bandana failed to contain the long wavy blonde locks that fell down to his shoulders, his pale yellow eyes showing a fierce will but also a deep kindness and compassion. His long cleanly shaven face set in a stony expression as he looked at the blank world around him until it rested on the other man half his height, causing his stern face to crack into a warm smile. "Gururara. So this is your doing, you Roger." The giant chuckled, sounding like the grinding of stone. The man next to him grinned broadly, covering almost a third of his face. His messy black hair casting his eyes in shadows and dark stubble cast his cheerful face further in darkness. He was dressed in a black shirt with the top few buttons open, revealing his toned chest beneath, under a crimson captain's coat reaching just past his knees. A dark blue sash held up his gray trousers tugged into loose brown boots. If the giant was the unmoving mountain of strength, then this man was the wind, carefree and wild. "Come on, Whitebeard, you really think I planned this?" he asked the giant man, never losing his trademark grin. "Not that I'm complaining, I haven't felt this good in years, like a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders," Roger said, rolling his shoulders experimentally, satisfied with the ease and responsiveness of his body. Whitebeard grunted, silently agreeing with his old friend and rival. He felt and looked like he did back in his prime, not long after eating the gura gura fruit. His eyes settled on the throne before him, scanning its jagged and broken surface. "What is this place?" he thought, his eyes following the fish darting through the air and into the coral throne before them. "This is the world between," said a new voice, seeming to come from everywhere, both men's eyes darting around them before settling on the throne and its occupant. A man observed them with a sly smirk. He was dressed in a light sea blue open shirt, revealing his swimmer physique underneath, navy cargo trousers and black sea boots. He reclined lazily in his throne, his long sea green hair tied back in a simple ponytail, his clothes and hair floating and moving like he was immersed underwater, moving with unseen currents. "I've been waiting for some time for you, Gall D. Roger, king of pirates, and you Edward Newgate, the world's strongest man." "Why? Who are you? What do you want with us?" asked the shorter of the two men, frowning only slightly as his grin vanished as he looked over the man before them, his relaxed posture and the golden trident in his right hand sending waves of sheer power greater than anything the two strongest men of the stronger sea had ever felt before. The man smiled lazily as he regarded the two men before him. "I have many Mons, Poseidon, Neptune, Earth Splitter, Susano, Najord, Davy Jones, the list goes on and on. He said, producing a notebook filled with a list of names, however you can call me Trident. As for what I want and why I have an interest in you. Well, that is simple. I want to offer two of the greatest men to sail to seize a second chance. He said, letting go of the notebook which floated in space next to his head. I want to offer you a start in a world unlike any you have ever seen or heard of in all your travels. That seems an offer too good to be true. What's the catch? Asked Whitebeard, narrowing his eyes at the strange man. Catch? Trident asked in surprise. It's only a catch if you are forced to make this decision. You'll get to go to this new world without any catch but, he said, pausing as he straightened, fixing his piercing blue eyes that spoke of centuries of hard living, losing completely the lazy posture as the invisible current around him picked up. If you want your precious people to come with you, then you will listen to what I say very carefully and follow my offer to the letter. Both men looked at each other, realizing just how little choice they had. What are your terms, Trident-san? I asked the former pirate king slowly. Trident smiled warmly, the currents around him calming as he lay back. I will bring across a set number of men and women from your world, but in exchange you must agree to seek out a village in this world and join as a new clan. You will have your chance to prove yourself before you meet their leader. Only after you have set up a clan for yourselves will I send your friends across. He said, eyeing the two, noting their reluctance to obey any form of authority being used to the world government that ruled their world. And don't worry, government there is nowhere near as corrupt as your world government. Both men looked at each other. It doesn't seem we have much choice, Roger, said the larger man of the two men in defeat. No, it doesn't, said Roger quietly, deep in thought. I say we agree. It makes no sense to throw away a second chance at life away from those bastards in the Marines and world nobles. Whitebeard nodded slowly. We agree to your offer, Trident, but you had better keep your word or trust me you will suffer. The now facial hair-free man growled at him. When an immortal gives his word, he is bound to keep it no matter how much he wishes to break it. He said, crossing his heart, leaving a glowing blood-red cross that lifted from his chest and formed an aged scroll, a blood contract. Just sign with your blood and our business will be complete. He said, offering the tip of his trident to them as the contract floated toward them. Both men reluctantly pricked their fingers on the tip and a drop of blood from each fell onto the parchment, dissolving into the paper and reforming into their signatures. What happens now? Asked Edward Newgate, unnerved by the mischievous smile on the immortal's face. Now, he chuckled, lifting his weapon above his head and drew a perfect circle in the air, forming a portal over the two pirates. Now you fight for your lives and those of the people in your new home, he said, smirking before the portal dropped, swallowing the two notorious pirates into a world filled almost as strange as their own and ninja with powers almost as strange as their own. October 10th, forest around Konoha. The usually peaceful and tranquil sea of trees surrounding Konoha, home to the ninja clans of the Land of Fire, was ablaze with crimson fires that lit the night. Konoha's ninja shot through the trees, trying with little effect to repel the source of destruction slowly marching toward their village. A giant fox with 9 swaying tails roared in anger as kunai, shuriken and jutsu bounced of its body, leaving little harm. A single elderly ninja dressed in a black jumpsuit with armored mesh segments over the lower parts of his limbs and an armored hood tried his best to organize the dwindling forces of Konoha's ninja. Sandame-sama, where is the Yondaime Hokage-sama? Asked a jonin next to him, his eye forced shut from a gash across his eyes. It was a good question, one that the elderly ninja had asked himself since the attack had begun. He worried for his successor and his young wife, knowing that for the fox to be here that something must have gone terribly wrong. What could have happened? He was knocked out of his musings when a young chunin shouted next to him and pointed into the sky above them. The elder ex-cage looked toward the area the young chunin was indicating and his eyes widened in surprise. A small circular white area, no bigger than 2 meters across, formed in the air above them. While that was odd by most accounts, the figures falling from the widened space drew everyone's eyes, following them as they fell. The smaller of the 2 figures landed lightly despite falling over 50 feet from the portal. He was dressed in an odd crimson coat and loose closed-toe brown boots that seemed cumbersome to the ninja around him. He turned to look at the ex-cage, revealing his carefree grin on his lightly stubble-covered face topped with long messy black hair, a half-open black shirt and loose gray trousers tied on with a deep blue sash beneath his odd calf-length coat. The ninja barely had time to take in this stranger before the second figure landed, shaking the earth on impact, causing many ninja to stumble and fall, yet the two men remained upright. He stood twice as tall as all the men gathered, well over 12 feet tall, dressed in a white coat that appeared to be the same design as the first man hanging off his shoulders, but unlike the smaller man, he had a stony expression that spoke of a strength that could crush mountains. He wore loose tan trousers tugged into high black boots and tied off by a purple sash similar to the smaller man. He wore a bandana with no forehead protector that failed to contain his shoulder-length locks, but what was drawing the most looks, from men and women alike, was the slabs of solid muscle covering the giant's bare arms, neck and torso. The ninja present quickly brought up kunai and dropped into combat stances, the X-Cage holding a giant staff that looked ridiculous held by such a slim and small man. The two strangers turned to each other and the larger indicated for the smaller to take the lead, but both froze for a second before turning as one to face the demon behind them, fixing its crimson eyes on the newcomers. "So that's what the bastard was talking about," said the shorter man, crossing his arms over his chest. The giant grunted, looking down at his companion. "So it seems, do you want to go first?" asked the larger man, his voice vibrating through the earth, or so it seemed to the ninja around him. "Age before beauty," the shorter man began before pausing, a contemplative look on his cheerful features. "You know, I don't know what to call you. Know you've lost that moon on your top lip of yours, Eddie?" asked the shorter man, completely undaunted by the killing intent directed toward them by the demon, which made even the X-Cage sweat in fear. "Whatever suits you, brat, it won't stop you calling me it," said the larger man, stepping forward slowly toward the Nine Tails in silent confidence, slowly picking up speed until he was running faster than most Chunin there. The shorter man's grin widened and raced off after the giant, laughing to himself as he quickly caught up with the man. "Hizashi," said the bewildered X-Cage said as he turned to a pale-eyed Jonin nearby whose normally impassive face and posture was stunned and shaken. "What did you see?" Hizashi met the eyes of the X-Cage with a look that had not been seen in his clan in years. Terror. They are impossible," was all the man could manage, unable to say the sheer power, so akin chakra and yet so much more potent that the men led off in waves as if unable to hold it all in at once. "They are monsters," he said, and turned wide-eyed in the direction the men had run toward, the Nine Tails. The other ninjas followed his gaze to see two figures leap toward the beast before a giant wave of light blue energy unlike anything they had seen before collided with the fox, causing it to roar in anger and something that no one expected, pain, rearing onto its hind legs as it cried out. Time seemed to slow for those watching as they saw something that defied all logic. The air in front of the beast's stomach was cracking, forming a glowing spider web as the cracks lengthened and thickened. The air held that shape for a split second before it shattered like glass, causing a shockwave that threw the fox and ninja off their feet. Seconds later, a second break formed in the air beneath the falling fox and broke, throwing it through the air away from the village before a series of blue energy waves struck the mightiest of the Biju. The X-Cage gaped at the sight, unable to believe that two men not only injured a Biju but also knocked it down, a feat only an army or a cage could hope to accomplish. "What are they?" Again his thoughts were interrupted, as a giant red-orange toad wearing a blue open samurai shirt, wielding a giant tanto and smoking a giant pipe drew the beast's attention from the newcomers. A figure with golden hair could be seen briefly on the monstrous toad's back as he formed a complex series of hand seals before a blinding light filled the night, forcing the ninja there to lift up their arms before their faces to protect their eyes. When the light faded, the fox and toad had vanished along with the newcomers, leaving everyone praying that their last hope could defeat the beast. Undisclosed chamber. Konoha, 2 hours later. Sarutobi Hiruzen sat tiredly, smoking on his famous pipe as he looked at the other occupants of the room with eyes that showed his growing age. He sighed as he remembered the scene an hour earlier when the two strangers before him had reappeared after the Kyuubi vanished, the larger of the two carrying two bodies and the smaller carrying a small wrapped bundle. Flashback. Two figures slowly marched toward Konoha where a platoon of Jonin were waiting ready behind Hiruzen, eyeing the strange newcomers warily. His eyes widened as they came closer and he saw the two wrapped bodies in the giant's arms, fearing the worst until he saw a small wriggling bundle in the shorter man's arms. He soon realized it was much worse than he feared. A small crowd began to form, consisting of ninja and civilian alike as the figures came to a stop a few feet from Hiruzen. The giant slowly knelt and gingerly laid down the bodies he was carrying, a sad look cracking his stony features. Hiruzen slowly knelt and reached out with a trembling hand to one of the sheets covering the body closest to him and lifted it enough to see the closed-eye face, topped with blonde hair that he knew so well. He looked up at the giant before him, narrowing his eyes before looking at the bundle in the second man's arms and slowly stood to see the sleeping face of a blonde-haired boy with 6 scars along his rosy cheeks and a black seal over its navel. A shinobi nearby saw the child and came to the same conclusion as Hiruzen. "A Jinchuriki," he whispered in fear, causing a murmur to spread through the crowd. The murmurs slowly turned from shock to hate and anger till there were calls for the boy's blood. "Kill the Kyuubi! Kill the brat! Kill the demon! It must be destroyed!" Hiruzen turned and released his potent killing intent, silencing the crowd before turning back to the newcomers and gasping at the sheer pressure they were releasing. "Kill a small, innocent child. A child who has done nothing to you," growled the giant, standing to his full height. "What kind of monsters are you?" A brave civilian spoke up. "He is the Kyuubi reborn. Killing him will kill the beast," she called out, snapping the crowd into frenzy. 2 Chunin darted forward with kunai drawn, ready to end the child's life, knowing little the power of the men before them. Faster than seemed physically possible for his frame, the giant grabbed the first and hurled him into Konoha's walls with a sickening crack. His other hand came round in a fist as hard as stone, connecting with the Chunin's ribs before the air cracked around the giant's fist, shattering the air with a concentrated shock wave. The Chunin's torso exploded with blood as his body was torn to pieces by the earth-shattering force behind the single blow, showering those gathered in a shower of body and gore. The crowd stood speechless before more charged toward the men. Hiruzen lifted his hand to order the ninja there to stop them but was stopped by the shorter of the 2 strangers. He met the man's eyes and left something he had not felt in all his years as Hokage, powerless. The crowd leapt, weapons drawn as the man stepped forward slowly, lifting his head to glare at the attackers. A power exploded from the man, something far more potent than any killing intent that the ninja there had felt, greater than even that of the Kyuubi. The attackers couldn't even register this terrible aura the small man was producing as they were knocked out where they stood. Hiruzen sweated heavily, barely able to breathe for what seemed like hours, but what could have been only a few seconds, that the presence filled the air before it vanished as quickly as it came. The 2 men turned to the aging ex-cage, looking him up and down. "Are you Sarutobi Hiruzen?" the giant asked, shaking the earth with his voice. The ex-cage could only nod as he stared dumbly at the 2 men. "We need to talk." End flashback. Hiruzen examined the men gathered, Jiraiya, Hitaki Kakashi, Hyuga Hiyashi and the 2 strange men with the baby boy resting on the table in front of them. "So you say you are both from another world, a world mostly dominated by sea, and where you 2 are among 2 of the most notorious pirates?" asked Hiruzen, fixing his gaze on the 2 strangers who nodded slowly. "And the man who sent you here said for you to prove yourself to our village enough to join us as a new clan before some of your crew and families can be brought across to this world to join you." The 2 strangers nodded again. "And you did this by fighting the strongest of the Biju with nothing but a sword, fists and a strange powers you call devil fruits and haki, which is unique to your world. The guru fruit to be exact," the shorter man added. "You were then sent with the beast to a location several miles from here where you witnessed the sealing of the Kyuubi into this boy." The shorter man nodded, set a pair of bloodstained scrolls on the table. "Well, I don't know what you call it, but that overgrown kitsune was pulling into the weird mark on the kid's stomach after as his parents were dying. The father gave this to me to give to a man called Jiraiya and to tell him that he had better look after the kid or I'm to give this someone called Tsunade," said the shorter man, revealing a bloodstained scroll sealed with a red spiral before stowing it away again. "Someone about the first Ika book," he said, causing the ninja in the room to sweatdrop and the white-haired man next to him pale. "Take it that's you?" he asked, curious as to who this Tsunade was. The self-proclaimed super pervert could only nod and accepted the 2 scrolls of the table. Hiruzen pushed that information aside and focused again on the 2 men. "What proof do you have of these claims? Who sent you here?" "I believe I can answer that, Sandame-san," sounded a new voice which caused the 2 strangers to stiffen as they turned to see a handsome man dressed in a light sea blue open shirt, doing nothing to hide the swimmer physique underneath, navy cargo trousers and black boots like the larger of the 2 strangers. He looked at the 2-dimension travelers. "Roger," he said calmly, getting a nod from the shorter man who grinned broadly. San-Asan, he said cheekily, getting a laugh from the newcomer. We were wondering when you would show up. The giant said calmly, the table shaking at the sound of his voice, causing the small child on it to squirm for a moment in his sleep before settling down again. The newcomer smiled at the giant. Edward. He said warmly, greeting him like an old friend, you met your side of the bargain, so I will be sending you to your new clan compound. At this moment Hiruzen managed to regain his composure at the sudden appearance of the newcomer, who somehow made it past over 300 ninjas to reach them. You presume that we will be giving them clan status? He said calmly. Now the Sandame was not a stupid man, he hadn't survived this long by making stupid mistakes. He knew that the two men in front of him would be invaluable to the village, probably acting as great a deterrent as, if not greater than, a Jinchuriki, but he still had no idea what their true goal was. Even if we did, what else would you want from us? Trident smiled, like he was amused at the act of a child, making the old cage to feel like a genin fresh out of the academy. Oh, nothing really, they just wish for the same rights as the rest of your ninja, with a large compound, and for the right to some of their stronger members to deny missions. Hiruzen frowned as he thought over the terms. Why should we give you your last term? All ninja must do their part. Trident nodded at the elderly cage's statement. True, but most ninja can't destroy islands with their hands and knock out armies with a burst of conqueror's haki. Reasoned the immortal, and if certain individuals somehow slipped in a mission that would provoke a war with Kumo or Suna or Iwa or even Kiri, you'd break the elemental nationals when you unleashed the members of this new clan. Hiruzen nodded, catching the meaning behind Trident's words. Very well, but it will take time to build the compound, and at the moment the rebuilding efforts take priority. Also, you won't become an official clan until the council agrees to the proposal. He said slowly, already dreading the mess of papyrwork that was about to fall onto his shoulders, again. That won't be a problem, one will be coming across that will take care of the compound. He said with a knowing smile as he glanced at Roger. Oro Jackson can vouch for him. He said, causing Roger's eyes to widen and his grin to broaden, producing a scroll filled with the details of the new clan's rights and privileges as well as the ownership of a large plot of land near the edge of the city. So do we have a deal? The immortal said, a pen appearing seeming out of nowhere as he flicked his wrist. Hiruzen hesitantly took the pen, reading the contract, noting the wording made it so only he could give them orders, making them out as a new force in Konoha that gave them the freedom they required but the loyalty that the village needed. He smiled when he saw it also ensured that the council had little say in what was done with the clan with the exception of breaches of the law. It was completely loophole-free, something that never happened these days. He smiled, realizing how much this would piss off the civilian council in Danzo, and, with no small measure of satisfaction, signed on the dotted line. The immortal grinned. Good choice, the rest will be at the new compound site tomorrow. Good day, gentlemen, he said, bowing before he vanished, filling the room with the pleasant scent of the ocean. So the gears were set in motion for a better destiny for Konoha and the elemental nations. Setting the foundations of a plan 5 years from being set into motion and the beginning of a second chance for those that earned it in a world as crazy as their town. 1 year after the events of Marineford. The captain. Ruskana Island, Calm Belt. The island of Ruskana, a seeming tropical paradise surrounded by perfectly still crystal clear waters but hidden in the calm depths, the world's deadliest predators nested and feasted on unwary sailors who braved the tranquil waters of the Calm Belt. Any of those unfortunate enough to make it through the monster-infested waters to the island itself would be met with prehistoric-like jungles, weekly changes in season and giant, vicious creatures that would reduce the unfortunate into little more than what could fill a small matchbox. Despite or more accurately because of these dangers, a young man, only recently turned 18 years of age, and an elderly man were currently training, preparing for a sea far worse than any other in any world. The young man, the shorter of the two, gazed out the calm waters surrounding the island, this red vest hanging open, revealing a vicious red scar in the form of a giant X on his lean, wiry chest, as the vest and his blue denim shorts floating on a gentle breeze. His face set in a slight frown, the small scar under his eye showing only a hint of the hardships he faced before this point along with the scar on his chest. His messy black locks casting a slight shadow over his eyes. Why so serious, Luffy-kun? Asked the elderly man to the boy, Monkey D. Luffy, the captain of the scattered Straw Hat Pirates. Luffy blinked, seeming to come out of a deep train of thought, before turning to the older man, "Oh hey Rayleigh, it's nothing." The younger man said, sounding distracted as his gaze shifted to the sea again. Rayleigh smiled kindly, like a grandfather would to his grandson, his shoulder-length white hair, floating in the breeze along with his long goatee. A thin scar ran through his right eye behind his round spectacles. His long white cloak and black shirt drifted on the light wind. Much like the younger man, he wore only simple sandals on his feet with a pair of spotted green and black shorts allowing for ease of movement. "You've sensed it Rayleigh, the Dark King," asked Luffy as he stood next to him. "Something is coming." "Something is already here," came a new voice, causing both men to turn and stare at the new arrival, noting the light green hair and impressive physique of the new arrival. "Hello Dark King Rayleigh." "Mugiwara no Luffy," the stranger said slowly, smiling slightly at the pair. Luffy blinked and took on a thoughtful look that didn't suit his boyish face. "Zoro?" the oblivious boy asked, surprising the old man and stranger before the both sweat dropped. "No Luffy, I'm not your tri-sword, moss-headed, Shinigami-hated friend," the newcomer said, after coming over his surprise, resisting the urge to rub his temples. "My name is Trident and I would to offer you a deal," the immortal said, noticing the serious expression now on the straw hat-wearing boy's face. "What if I told you I could extend your training from the year you have remaining to over 10 years in the same space of time?" the immortal asked, smirking at the skeptical looks on both of the pirates' faces. "Pray tell, how would you do that, Trident-san?" asked the elder of the two mortals, "and what would be the catch?" The immortal smiled. "That is quite simple, I'd take you to a place where time moves at a faster pace than here. As for what I want, well that's simple, I want you to find the One Piece and fix this broken world," he said slowly, making sure that Luffy had time to understand everything he said. "Fix the world?" the boyish young man asked, confused. "How do I do that?" he asked, tilting his head curiously. "Simply destroy the government," the immortal said, leaning against a nearby tree as he spoke. "When you find the One Piece, it will start a war like none this world has ever seen. Marineford will seem like a small skirmish in comparison. This will be the time when I want you and your allies to overthrow this corrupted and immoral organization that control my seas." The immortal growled in anger and disgust. "In exchange for doing this, I will give you and your allies a chance to obtain powers beyond anything you can imagine." "Not interested," interrupted Luffy, turning away from the immortal. Trident simply smiled. "Not interested in power? That's exactly why it has to be you to do this," the immortal said, drawing two objects from behind his back. "But maybe you're more interested in these," he said, drawing the young man's attention. Luffy's eyes widened and he whirled round as he recognized the two hats in the immortal's hands. The first was a dark orange fedora with red beads with two blue faces, one smiling and the other frowning, wrapped around it. Luffy's heart grew heavy and ached as he remembered how the owner died in his arms. The second was a large black top hat with a pair of blue goggles wrapped around it. Just seeing the hat caused 111 supernovas to freeze. "You know the owners, don't you?" Trident asked with a sad smile. "I was greatly saddened when they passed, so much in fact I had to step in," he said softly and fixed Luffy with a sad gaze. "Would you like to see them again?" the immortal asked Luffy, watching as his eyes widened further. "All you have to do is take up my offer, but if you don't want to, I'll go, but only if I can take Rayleigh and my Nakama with me," the young pirate interrupted, bringing a smile to the immortal's face. Trident extended a callus-covered yet nimble-fingered hand. "Then let us be off." "Pirate King," he said, smiling warmly at the young man who grasped his hand in a strong grip, causing all those present to vanish in a blue flash. 1 year after the events of Marineford. The Swordsman. Karaigana Island, Paradise, Grand Line. In one of the darkest areas of the Grand Line rested an island, whose strange curled mountains and dark forests set it out from its neighbors, drawing sailors into the strange green fog. Of those that enter the forest, only the sound of their screams and death cries leave, with only 3 alive today that have ever walked out of its dark canopy alive, one because of her ability to demoralize her enemies, be they man or beast. The second was without doubt the greatest swordsman alive in the world today. The last was the first mate of the infamous Straw Hat Pirate and the few in world to use more swords than they have arms. Said Straw Hat currently lay in a bed in the sole remaining building on the island, being tended by a pale pinkett with large round eyes with 3 thick lashes under each eye. Her small frame was covered in a long black strapless dress with lavender ruchings, her pink hair fell down to the small of her back in spiral braids. "Stupid swordsman," she growled, redressing the recently acquired wound across his left eye as well as the other newer wounds across his chest and limbs. "Always going to fight those stupid apes. Why do I have to take care of him? For using your master's residence I think Mahawk actually has a soft spot for broken things, I could never tell which." A came new voice from behind the Pinkett, "But then again maybe you have a thing for them too," said the newcomer, a man with sea green hair dressed in a blue open shirt, navy cargo trousers and black boots. "As for you Kaikoku Gari no Zoro, I have a proposition for you," he said, smirking slyly. The Pinkett blushed at the stranger's suggestion. "Baka," she yelled, flustered as she clenched her fist in anger, glaring at the stranger. "The swordsman Baka is unconscious," she yelled, failing to notice her green-haired patient sit up behind her. "Annoying woman," growled the muscular green-haired man in question. His dark eye rested on the newcomer, raising his visible eyebrow curiously. "New boyfriend?" he asked, curious of the new man with similar hair to him. The Pinkett growled in anger, flicking her wrist to send a smiling ghost through the green-haired cyclops' chest. The man fell onto his hands and knees, a dark cloud forming above him. "I am lower than scum, I don't deserve to live," he mumbled, completely miserable and hopeless. The newcomer's sweat dropped at the antics of the two pirates. "You know I do kind of need to talk to him," the newcomer said, waving his hand through the air, dispelling the miserable aura around Zoro. "Now, Mr. Roranoa, I have an offer to make you, a chance I'm giving all of your crew," he said, grabbing one of the Pinkett's ghosts as it dove for his chest, causing the young girl's eyes to widen. "Now Perona, that is no way to treat a guest," he said, sounding amused at the Pinkett's attempt to subdue him. His gaze returned to the green-haired swordsman, now standing at his full height, only just shorter than the stranger, dressed in just black trousers tucked into black boots and a green haramaki. His muscular chest was wrapped in fresh bandages with a black strip of cloth tied around his left bicep. His stern and rugged face was set in his signature scowl, his cropped green moving slightly on the gentle breeze pouring in from the open window. "So Pirate Hunter, I am extending an offer to your entire crew and their allies. I'm offering you an extension on your training trip, from the year you have left to over 10 years and a chance to meet someone who you've been chasing for over 14 years. The Straw Hat Swordsman's scowl deepened. "I've only been chasing one man all these years and he is currently training me," growled the burly, green-haired pirate, his hand unconsciously resting on the white katana on his right hip. The newcomer smirked and simply pointed a finger at the pale katana the swordsman was gripping, causing the swordsman's eyes to widen. How? She's dead," he growled angrily, the knuckles of his right hand turning white as he tightened his grip on the white sword. "But what if I told you that she was alive and well, where I would take you? What if I told you that your captain has already agreed to going? What would your answer be, swordsman?" asked the newcomer calmly, giving no sign of deceit that Zoro could see as he held out his hand to the battle-worn swordsman. The first mate of the Straw Hat Pirate didn't even hesitate. "If what you say is true and my captain agreed, then I have no choice but to agree, do I?" he said, gruffly as he grasped the stranger's hand with a callous and scar-covered hand. "Well then we'd best not hang around then, should we, Roranoa Zoro? Brace yourself," the newcomer said before a bright blue light filled the room, eradicating all shadows in the room. When the light finally faded, Zoro, Perona and the mysterious man were gone, leaving behind only the bloody bandages that had covered the green-haired swordsman. 1 year after the events of Marineford. The Cook. Momoro Island, Paradise, Grand Line. Nestled in violet waters under a pink sky is the island of Momoro, a land of pink forests and heart-shaped mountains and a constant, physic-defying heart-shaped rainbow. Its inhabitants, be they man or beast, all have the heart of a maiden, causing men to wear the clothes of women and wearing thick layers of makeup. The result of the change is a distorted and hideous creatures that, while dressed as women, have strong jaws, stubble-covered faces and bodies of overly masculine men with heads greatly out of proportion with their bodies. Despite this, there was a single soul on the island who has broken free of its curse, choosing to use the flamboyant and feminine kingdom, which he considered hell, to train to protect his crew and obtain the secrets of the Okama attack cuisine by running day and night from the inhabitants before facing the 99 masters of Newkama Kempo that held the secrets of these recipes. Said man right now was running for all he was worth from a horde of the island's inhabitants, cursing with each breath he took. Wondering not for the first time why he agreed to the shitty Okama Queen's terms, to stay and train in this hell. It seemed like such a good idea at the time. Sanji-kun, cried the transvestite horde, pushing the blonde to run faster and further than ever before. As far away as he could from the horde of inhuman creatures that wished to change him into one of them. He ran and ran, till a rock wall cut him off. Gritting his teeth he kicked out beneath him and leapt into the air, ignoring the sharp pain in his thighs that followed. When he reached the peak of his jump he kicked the air beneath him, the power and speed compressing the air into a solid enough mass to jump of, spending the blonde dressed in a formal black suit to shoot up higher into the sky. Quite a trick you have there, Kuro Ashi Sanji, sounded a deep voice to his right, causing the blonde lose his concentration and miss his next kick, falling toward the ground over 50 feet below. He stopped suddenly in the air, his face flattening against an invisible barrier before his body slammed into the barrier. Oh, sorry about that. The formally dressed blonde, identified as Sanji, stood slowly, turning to glare at the source of the voice, finding a man dressed in a blue shirt, navy cargo, black boots and topped with a sea green ponytail. Baka, what were you trying to do, you shitty bastard? Shouted the young blonde, looking exhausted and battered, his suit torn and dirty from his hellish training. Who the hell are you and how am I standing here? Growled the exhausted blonde, dusting himself off as he reached for a cigarette but remembered he had run out over a week ago. The newcomer laughed at Sanji's outburst and drew out a packet of cancer sticks from his pocket. Here, he said, tossing the pack to the nicotine addict who snatched them quickly out the air. As for who I am, well, I go by many names, but you Trident, you're standing on compressed air and I'm here to make you an offer. The newcomer said, amused as he watched Sanji almost rip the cigarette pack in two to obtain one of the foul cancer sticks and lit one with shaking hands. I offer you a chance to turn this last year of training into over 10 years, in a place far from here with your nakama. The blonde-haired man looked up, fixing Trident with his one visible eye and its curly eyebrow, slowly exhale from his smoke-filled lungs. And my shitty captain has agreed to this? Asked Sanji coolly, frowning deeply as he examined the strange man in front of him. On the condition the rest of his crew agreed. So do we have a deal? Asked the immortal, holding out his hand to the blonde cook. Sanji hesitated, fearful of the hell he might be sent to. Trident noticed this and smirked slyly. Did I mention that the woman are as beautiful navigator and archaeologist and more open to advances? Well, that isn't completely true but not a complete lie either, thought Trident. Sanji's eyes widened and his grin widened to rival his captain as he grasped Trident's hand tightly. You've got yourself a deal, exclaimed the lovesick cook. Trident smirked. Well, that was easy. He thought as the horrendous hot pink skies were filled with a brilliant blue light, bathing the pink island below in a blue light. When the light faded, the skies above Mamwara where the two men had stood were empty and cries of dismay filled the air as the Okama's toy vanished. 1 year after the events of Marineford. The Sniper. Greenstone, Boine Archipelago, Paradise, Grand Line. In one of the seeming calmer areas of the Grand Line, sailors will find a strange green island with what seems to be mountain in the upturned claws, the sharpened tips, reaching for the impossibly blue skies above. This sets it out as strange, true, but nowhere near as ridiculous as the other places in the Grand Line. Know what truly captures the attention of sailors is the smell. Even from a mile away, the scent of a feast of delights from ramen, roast pork and beef to desserts such as fudge, chocolate and ice cream draw sailors into the deep green forest in between the island's jagged peaks. In this forest many of weaker marines, pirates and civilians have perished when they encountered one of the other creatures also drawn in from the sea by the promise of a banquet of delights. For those strong enough to pass the dangers of the first forest to the island's center would find a treasure trove of heavenly foods, trees growing fresh, steaming ramen, pools of hot chocolate, bushes made of cotton candy inviting the weary to gorge till they can no longer move. This would prove to be a fatal mistake for man and beast alike. Every few days the island reveals its true colors, the jagged peaks rising and the center of the island opening into a dark and cavernous pit, seeming without end. All those unlucky enough to be on the island at this moment, too fat from gorging to move, would find themselves falling toward this dark hell, into the island's bowels where their fatty bodies would be digested to feed the carnivorous island as the island's arms rose and closed shut. Despite these dangers, an unlikely pair had taken this island as home for the last year, using the dangerous creatures and bountiful supply of food to build muscle and train in the use of the islands of hidden gems, the green pops. The older of the pair was also the stranger of he duo, dressed in a shell of black armor that covered his round body that sat atop thin legs covered in what appeared to be old-fashioned white pantaloons and black boots. A mantle rested on his shoulders with a thick collar of fur surrounding his neck, a black helmet in the style of a beetle hid his face and a purple cape hung from his shoulder giving him the look of an outdated superhero or lunatic. The latter seeming more likely in this case. The second man, barely one at that, was a far more normal, dressed in dark brown overalls that showed his recently earned muscular arms and chest, glistening with sweat as he rested on his knees, his face hidden by thick, curly, black hair that reached just past his shoulders. "Well done, Usoppin," exclaimed the older man, slapping the younger man's back heartily. "You actually beat a giant stag beetle." He continued, giving the impression that he was smiling proudly behind his helmet, indicating to the unconscious giant beetle behind them, wrapped in a strange fern-like plant. The younger man grinned, looking up at the older man, revealing his round dark eyes, thick lips and a ridiculously long nose. "It was a piece of cake, Hercule-san," the young man lied, panting heavily with his body littered with bruises and cuts. "Oh really, it seemed more like you barely managed to defeat it," came a new voice, causing both men to whirl round to see a grinning sea-green-haired man. "You have come far since the last time you donned your mask, Usopp, or should I say, Sogeking," the man said, smiling knowingly. The younger man, identified as Usopp, froze, staring wide-eyed at the stranger before quickly putting on a confident front. "You must have me confused with my friend Sogeking. I am the great Captain Usopp of the Usopp Pirates with over 3,000 men under my command." The newcomer interrupted, holding out 3 fingers in front of him, "Carrot, onion and pepper," he said calmly, causing the young pirate to pale, turning from an olive tan to snow white. Who are you? How do you know about my men? What did you do to them? What do you want?" asked quickly Usopp, barely keeping a stutter of fear out of his voice. The newcomer simply smiled. "Peace, young sniper, my name is Trident and I mean you and your friends no harm. In fact, I came here to offer you a very beneficial deal for you. Will you hear me out?" The long-nosed, young man looked at the newcomer with relief but an equal measure of distrust. "What kind of deal?" he asked, his hand slowly reaching from the new-created slingshot at his hip. "One your captain has already agreed to. I want to offer the Straw Hats and your allies more time to prepare for the new world and its dangers," Trident said calmly, fixing a fatherly gaze upon Usopp. "I offer you and Nakama a simple deal. I offer you over 10 years in the space of the year you should have left in a place where men have abilities that defy all logic and can be learned by anyone if they're willing to work for it. Your captain has already agreed to my terms on the condition that the rest of his crew go too." This caused Usopp to frown. Why would Luffy agree to such a deal? "I'd probably consider it cheating," the young pirate said skeptically, knowing his captain there had to be something more to this deal. "What else did you offer him?" The immortal smiled at the young pirate. "You're right of course, but it isn't what I offered, it was what is in this other world," he said and produced a familiar orange cowboy hat. The 2 blue faces on their red bead necklace reflected the summer sun. The young pirate's eyes widened to the size of saucers in his skull. "So what say you now, pirate?" he said slowly as he held out his hand to the young pirate. The young pirate was silent for a long time before meeting the immortal's calm gaze, his eyes set in a calculating frown. "Is she there?" he asked slowly, barely trusting his own voice. The sea-green-haired man simply nodded slowly. "Then I'm in," he said without hesitation and grasped the immortal's hand. The island of Greenstone lit up like the star it was shaped as a blue light exploded from near its center, catching the attention of every sailor in a 10-mile radius. When the first unfortunate fools landed, they found the island devoid of human life with only a yellow bandana remaining of the young pirate, his master and the god of the world of the strongest sea. 1 year after the events of Marineford. The archaeologist. Baltigo, Grand Line. In a secluded area of the chaotic Grand Line lies a plain desert island seemingly devoid of life and often overlooked by sailors, marine and pirate alike. A white sand blanketed the entire landmass, only broken by small mountains as pale as the sands that surround them, cut into twisted and jagged bluffs by the wind and bleached by the scorching sun. Despite its appearance as though it housed one of the greatest threats the world government has ever faced, the Revolutionary Army and their leader and most wanted man on the planet, Monkey D. Dragon. This group of brave souls work in the shadows, using guile and subterfuge to slowly weaken the world government and their corrupt leaders, the celestial dragons, and their hold on the world one country and island at a time. Over 100 nations and thousands of people have been freed by the movement or have joined their ranks against the world government. On one of the island's twisted peaks stood a love man dressed in a forest green cloak stared out toward the east, toward the weakest sea, the east blue, the winds catching the cloak, causing it to dance around the man, the hood, cloaking his face in shadows. I wonder why you always stand here and look toward the east blue, came a feminine voice from behind him as a figure dressed in a similar purple cloak. Maybe every time you look you pray for your son, the woman said, pulling back her hood to reveal a face which could only be described as beautiful with a curtain of lustrous black hair that reached down to between her shoulder blades. Her lips curled into an amused smile as her deep blue eyes scanned the man in front of her. Or maybe you regret leaving him alone all those years ago. The man in the green cloak stiffened at the last remark but quickly regained his composure. I did what was necessary, as I always have, as we always have, he said, slowly, a strong wind, pulling his hood down to reveal a stern face, darkened from years of hard work under the scorching sun. A blood-red tribal tattoo reached from his left temple to his chin. A mane of long spiky black hair floated on the wind, starting with a widow's peak. You should know this more than most of us, Nico Robin, he said, returning his gaze toward the weakest sea. But not for herself or your movement, came a third voice from behind them, causing the pair to turn, startled at the newcomers who managed to sneak up on two of the world's most wanted. He stood, leaning against the frame of the door that lead into the mountain fortress. He stood just over 6 feet 3 dressed in black boots, navy cargo trousers and an open light blue shirt despite the harsh heat and sand on the wind. Her loyalties lie to her captain and his crew, he said sounding amused from their reactions. But then you knew that, didn't you? Dragon. The man dressed in the green cloak frowned, narrowing his eyes at the stranger. To what do I owe the honor? Trident Sama. Dragon said, surprising respectfully considering his occupation and family. The newcomer smiled, enough with the formalities dragon, they'll suit you and your kin. Trident said smiling warmly at the world's most wanted man, a still hint of pride in his voice. As for why I am here, well, I came to speak with your lovely associate Nico Robin, he said, turning his piercing blue gaze onto the woman. About a matter that would help both her and her crew. Robin for her part schooled her expression well, hiding her surprise and suspicion under a calm and haughty mask. And what might this offer be, Mr. Trident-san? Asked the 29-year-old archaeologist, fixing the man in a calculating gaze. The sea-green-haired man's smile widened as he met her gaze. Simply, I'm going to offer you a chance to train for over a decade in the space of 1 year. Robin for her part managed to suppress the snort of disbelief at the ridiculous offer. That's not, she began but stopped when a hand rested on her shoulder. She turned and met the eyes of the world's most wanted man. Don't doubt him. This man has more power than you can ever hope to imagine. Dragon said in a deathly serious tone, he is the source of all the power in this world. The black-haired beauty's eyes widened, turning to look back at the smirking immortal. She quickly regained her composure though as she fixed the man in a calculating gaze. And what you get from this deal? I imagine that there is something you want from my nakama or myself. Clever girl. Indeed there is a price, but it is something that your captain has to pay and to which he has already agreed to on the condition that the rest of his crew join him in training, hence why I am here. Robin paused, studying the immortal's face for any sign of deception. Why would Luffy-san agree to your deal? What else did you tell him? What else? I offered him a chance to see 2 men he thought dead. The same as I offer you, the immortal said, drawing 2 photos out of his cargo trousers and threw them like a shuriken at Robin. The archaeologist caught them on a reflex and looked down to examine them, causing her to freeze in shock, eyes widening in disbelief. Impossible, she whispered, as she looked down at the grinning face of a cheerful old man with orange hair and beard that gave him a mane similar to a lion. The second photo showed a woman almost identical to Robin, but while Robin's lustrous hair was as midnight black, this woman had hair as white as virgin snow. But they're dead, she whispered, barely holding her impassive mask in place as she felt her heart break and yet fill with hope. Yes they are, Trident said softly, walking slowly over to Robin, at least in this world. They are waiting in a world quite different from this one, and it is where you and your nakama will be sent if you agree. he said softly, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. So what is your answer, Nico Robin? Stay here and limit your training to 1 year and fail in your quest, or join your crew on an adventure to a new world where you can see your mother and Saul again. Robin stayed quiet for a long time, simply staring longingly down at the photos in her hand as her heart and mind warred against each other. After what seemed like hours to those present but must have only been a few minutes, she turned to look at Dragon with pleading eyes. The world's most wanted man sighed heavily but nodded slowly. I agree, Trident-san, she said softly, barely more than a whisper on the wind. The immortal before her smiled warmly and held out his hand to the curvy woman before him, who slowly placed hers in his, bathing the world around them in a brilliant blue light. Dragon looked down as he brought his arm up to shield his eyes from the piercing light until it faded as quickly as it came, leaving him alone on the bluff. He turned toward the weakest sea once again. Keep safe, Nico Robin. I hope the world is ready for my son and his nakama. 1 year after the events of Marineford. The Doctor. Torino Kingdom, South Blue. In the blue water of the South Blue rests a small island that could be seen for several miles, though small and made mostly of rocky shores and forest. A single giant tree, rumored to be the tallest in all the blue seas, shot into the sky from the island's center, the trunk bare of branches except for 5 rings of foliage that was sturdy enough to hold the largest of the island's inhabitants. Many overlook the island not for lack of curiosity but because of the giant vulture-like birds that attack intruders on sight, lifting the unfortunate from their ships into the sky to be dropped from a height so high the intruder's organs liquefy on impact. Despite these fierce guardians, a tribe of obese cavemen live in harmony with these fierce aerial beasts, or at least they have, since a small tanuki-like creature dressed in a pink top hat with a white X imprinted on. This creature currently sat in a small hut that the villagers had given him out of gratitude for helping resolve their hostilities with their avian neighbors, blending herbs and extracts into medicines. The creature was just over 2 feet tall with a round body and large head, its thin arms and legs ending with black cloven hooves, seemingly as dexterous and malleable as human fingers. His face could be best compared with a children's teddy bear with a blue nose in place of the usual black, a small frown of concentration fixed in place, the short antlers jutting out from the pink top hat that he was rarely seen without. The brown fur on his body stiffened as he caught the faint scent of the sea underneath the herbs and medicines in his cabin. He turned slowly, his eyes finding a pair of black boots and navy cargo trousers blocking his view. He stiffened and slowly let his eyes travel up, past the muscular chest and open light blue shirt to the stoic, handsome face topped with sea green hair. The strange creature jumped back in surprise and fear, trying to cower behind a cabinet, badly with most of his body on view and only a small portion of his face actually hidden. "Skittish little guy, aren't ya?" asked the strange man, slowly taking a seat on the floor so he wasn't so intimidating. "Don't worry, I just want to talk with you, Chopper." The creature stiffened and slowly came away from the safety of the cabinet. "How do you know my name?" he asked, his childish voice wavering in fear. The stranger smiled warmly at the young doctor, who hasn't heard of Tony Chopper, the amazing doctor of the Straw Hats Pirate. Chopper's fear was instantly replaced with delight. "Baka. That doesn't make me happy," the young pirate denied, unconvincing as he danced happily on the spot. The stranger's sweat dropped at the young pirate's antics. "Sure it doesn't. Now Chopper, I would like to offer my help to you, that is if you are willing to listen," he said, causing the young doctor to freeze and look at the stranger cautiously. "What kind of help?" he asked in equal parts apprehension and curiosity. "Well, your captain has agreed to extend you training from remaining year to over a decade, but in the same space of time," the stranger said slowly before sighing at the look of bewilderment on the young pirate's face. "Let's just say that you get over 10 times the time to train and learn some techniques in medicine from some of your precious people," he said, and points to the young doctor's hat. "In fact, one of them gave you that hat in your name." The young pirate's eyes widened and he reached up to grip the rim of his pink top hat. "Dr. Halulik," he said quietly, feeling his heart grow heavy at the memory of his father figure. The stranger smiled warmly, gently placing a hand on the top of Chopper's hat. "You think a man like him would die like he did without someone noticing? As it is, he is alive in the place I will be taking your crew, and I promised him that he could see you again. He always said that his one regret in his life was not dying because of the trickery of a brat king," he said, leaning forward so he was at Chopper's level, Meeting his teary eyes, no, he regretted that he could never see you grow into the fine young man you have become. His words moved me to grant him a chance, in a world where he would be appreciated and a chance to see you again, he said softly, his eyes taking on a distant look. So I'm going to ask you Tony Chopper, do you want to go another adventure with your Nakama and see him again? If you do then just take my hand, the stranger said, snapping out of his trance, his eyes almost pleading the young pirate to accept as he removed his hand from the chopper's hat and held it out to the young pirate. The young doctor hesitated for a moment before extended his hoof, placing it into the stranger's hand. I accept, mister. The stranger smiled. Call me Trident, he said warmly before a blindly blue light filled the small hut, blinding those outside, and when the light finally dimmed the citizens of the village found it empty and the young doctor and stranger gone. 1 year after the events of Marineford. The shipwright. Future country Barujimoa, Karakuri Island, Paradise, Grand Line. In an area of the Grand Line where blizzards and freezing temperatures are the norm lies an island covered in thick snow and ice. Frozen mountains and plains of thick snow deterring all but those that need the island's help or delivered the inhabitants supplies. A single mountain stood higher than all the rest with 2 giant nail-like structures piercing its iced shell straight through the strange mountain. A giant spherical boulder lay nearby, as tall as one of the shorter mountains. Despite these horrendous and freezing conditions, a nation of genius calls it home, calling themselves the citizens of the future country Barujimoa, where the best and brightest minds can do their work in peace and without fear of thieves or government influences. Of these citizens, a single boy dressed in thick furs and his pet, a dog with metal armoring with the number 28 painted onto his shoulder armor and a glowing red visor, slowly climbed toward a ruined building carrying a large bag of supplies. When he reached the metallic shell of one of the buildings, he quickly checked that no one had followed him before moving a sheet of metal on the floor aside to reveal a staircase heading down into the earth. His cyborg dog dived down before the boy followed, covering up the entrance as he went. The descent lasted for only a few minutes before the stairs opened into a large laboratory with giant glass tubes filled with a glowing green-blue liquid, workbenches littered with tools, blueprints and strange machines whose purpose was a mystery to the young boy. A single figure sat by one of the benches, his back, covered in a dirty, burnt, tiger skin, facing the boy and his cyborg pet, working on something they could not see. Oi hentai-san, called the young boy to the large man, causing the man to stop and turn slightly, showing his face was covered by the tiger head of the rug. Oh Kitten-kun, it's you, said the giant man, turning fully so the pair could see him properly. He stood at just over 7 feet 5 inches with a body seemingly made out of layers of solid muscle with long thin legs. His arms though were made of metal and wires, starting at 2 spheres where his shoulders should be, each a foot across with a strange assortment of wires and weapons making them up. From these spheres 2 thin metal struts wrapped in thick coils of wire led down to a spherical joint that was attached to 2 large boxes without lids, revealing it a network of wires, gears, guns and other unidentifiable creations. It's super to see you, the giant man exclaimed, leaning to his left and bringing the boxes that made up his forearms together as he curled his giant metallic fists. It's good to see you to Frankie-san, said the boy, grinning as he brought the large bag to the cyborg. I brought you your supplies. The giant grinned from under the tiger head, taking the bag from the boy and pulling out a large bottle of cola. Yosh, cola, exclaimed the giant, opening the top before downing the bottle's contents. My, you sure love the tooth-killing nectar, don't you? Came a new voice from a dark shadow near the door, causing the large man to grab the young kitten, and his dog. He placed them behind him and held his arm straight ahead of him as 3 small guns up from his forearm, aiming at the space where the shadow had come from. Peace Cutty Flam, I only want to talk, said the voice again as a man dressed in a thick blue fur coat stepped out of the shadows, his sea-green hair held back in a ponytail above his handsome face. Frankie stiffened at the mention of the name, narrowing his eyes at the newcomer. Who are you? How do you know that name? The cyborg growled at the intruder. The stranger was unfazed by the larger man. I go by the name Trident and you are Cutty Flam, are you not, or do you prefer cyborg Frankie? Or just plain old Frankie? He asked, raising an eyebrow curiously. Because if you are, I'd like to offer you a deal. The large cyborg frowned beneath his tiger head mask. What kind of deal? He asked cautiously, keeping his weapons ready. Trident smiled and produced a photo from his coat. A super deal that I gave your Nakama. A chance for an extension on your training and a chance to see your precious people again, he said and held out the photo to the giant man. The cyborg slowly reached out with his free hand and took the photo from the sea green-haired stranger. Brought it up to his face to study probably, but almost dropped it when he saw who was smiling at him from the past. A single fat yellow-skinned man with a thick white beard grinned at him as he stood with a pair of teenager, one a purple-haired boy in overalls and the second was light blue-haired boy, wearing his unusual hair up in short spikes and wearing only a bright shirt and speedos. Impossible, he's dead. Well, that might be true of this world, but where your crew is going they are alive and well. I mean, did you think the sea god is blind to the injustices of this world? But how? Frankie said, barely stopping his voice from wavering as he fought back the guilt and sadness that was weighing down on his heart. Trident simply smiled and gently reached out to Frankie's arm, lowering it slowly. Why tell you how I did it when what you really want is an answer to the question that has weighed heavily down on you for over a decade? He said and offered his hand to the cyborg, so Cutty Flam. Frankie, will you accept my offer and go on one last adventure with your nakama and get your answer, or hide in your metallic shell and wallow in your guilt and self-pity? The tiger skin wearing, half-built cyborg slowly reached out his giant metallic hand to encase Trident's. If it means I get to see Tom Sensei and my captain has agreed, then how can I say no? The shorter man grinned and both were bathed in a blinding blue light that destroyed all shadows in the laboratory. When it dimmed, the young boy Kitten blinked, his friend and the stranger gone and confused as to what had just happened in front of him. 1 year after the events of Marineford. The Navigator. Weatheria, Sky over Water 7, Paradise, Grand Line. In one of the calmer areas of the Grand Line rested the bustling port island of Water 7, an island city that relied heavily on the sea in their delay lies, whether for the income of the dry docks on the first tier or the waterways that ran through each of the tiers. From afar it would be justified by many sailors to resemble the port island to that of an ornate fountain with a giant spout of water at the city's peak, feeding into the waterways below. Yet despite the wonder of this Venice-like port island, the greatest wonder would be overlooked by sailors and citizens alike. For over 1,000 miles above their heads a seemingly unassuming cloud was the true wonder. This cloud was Weatheria, and when those lucky enough to reach the necessary height laid eyes on the floating island, they likened the sight to looking upon heaven itself. Resting on the 3 tiers of cloud that made up the floating impossibility were fields of green pastures and windmill-like structures that old men in long, baggy robes and pointed hats could be seen entering and leaving with strange and often unassuming objects. Large balloons strained against the thick cords that held them to this heaven as they reached for the beautiful rainbow above, forming a perfect circle above the green pasture below. Large walkways snaked between the 3 levels of the island so the inhabitants could travel from the top and lower tiers to the small city of the middle tier. A young woman in her late teens sat on the green pastures of the lower tier, her bright orange shoulder-length hair, similar in color to a tangerine, floating playfully on the gentle breeze as she concentrated on the 3 strange poles in front of her, each bright blue in color with large spheres on the ends. Her thin, nimble finger delicately working on the installing strange new devices to the poles as a small frown of concentration marred her beautiful face. Her chocolate brown eyes to focus to see the man who had taken a seat in front of her until he cleared his throat to get her attention. "Excuse me, are you Nami?" he asked politely, startling the busty orange-haired beauty. The young woman instantly grabbed the 3 poles in front of her, combining them in a long bow staff before dropping into a defensive stance. "Who are you?" she growled, narrowing her eyes at the newcomer, taking in his black boots, navy cargo trousers, open blue shirt that showed of his muscular chest and sea green hair. "How did you get up here? How do you know who I am?" The man simply smirked and slowly stood. "My apologies, my name is Trident. I know all about you, your crew and your adventures across the strongest sea. As for how I got up here, well, you wouldn't believe me," he said calmly, his stance relaxed and confident. The woman, Nami, slowly lowered her bow staff and fixed the man in a calculating gaze. "What do you want, Trident-san?" she asked cautiously, getting the feeling the man before her was beyond anything she had ever seen before. "What I want is to offer you a deal, cat burglar, the same I offered your captain and crew," he said calmly, taking out a tangerine from his trouser pocket. Nami frowned, intrigued. "You've seen Luffy. How is he? Is he hurt? What kind of deal?" she asked quickly, her voice filled with concern for her childish captain. Trident smiled amused. Yes, I have seen him and he is perfectly alright, so you needn't worry about him. As for our agreement, I offered him a deal he couldn't refuse, a second chance if you will. He said, looking thoughtfully at the tangerine in his hands. The same chance I'm going to offer you, he said and gently tossed the fruit in his hand to the Erangel. Nami fumbled slightly as she caught the orange fruit, looking down at it with suspicious. Why are you giving me this? She asked, frowning as she examined the fruit. I was given it by a young woman in a place far from here, the place I'm offering to send you and your nakama to train for at least 10 years before returning you to your meeting place in a year's time, he said, not showing a hint of madness or humor as he spoke the impossible. And who is this woman? What would you get from this? She asked, not believing the strange man for a second. Come on, he claimed he could control time. Trident simply smirked. She said you would know her by that tangerine and the fact she made you a dress with a lion from one with a sunflower, oddly much like the figurehead of your ship. The orange-haired beauty froze, starting incredulously at he strange man, utterly stunned. Be Belmere, she managed to croak out, as she fought with her raging emotions, but how? Did you think the gods are blind to injustice and the lost potential in the world? Trident asked softly, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. Well, they do care, I care. I took her soul and gave her a new life in a new world where she might find some peace without having to worry about fishmen or being helpless against those that would take away those she holds dear. He said, his voice distant and oddly sad, but she made me promise to see you and your sister one last time. So here I am and I need your answer, Nami. He said, focusing his gaze on the young beauty in front of him in a piercing gaze that felt Nami feeling exposed and unconsciously cover herself. He slowly extended his hand to her. So what will it be, Nami-chan? Nami stared at his hand for a long time, trying to regain her control over her emotions. Will Luffy be there? She asked quietly, her usual confidence gone. Trident slowly nodded in response, his piercing gaze softening. Then I'll go, she said, regaining some of her usual confidence, and grasped his hand, causing an explosion of blinding blue light. The citizens below in Water 7 all paused as they were bathed in a brilliant blue light, turning to the sky to see one of the clouds above had lit up like a second sun. Even when the light faded, they continued to watch the skies, theories quickly being formed and legends about the strange light circulating quicker than wildfire. 1 year after the events of Marineford. The Musician. Water 7, Paradise, Grand Line. 12:15 p.m. The canals and streets of Water 7 were known for 4 things. The Jaeger bulls, strange horse-like creatures with flippers in place of legs and tail, carrying men, women, children and precious cargo through the waterways of the city, the beautiful masks sold by various vendors, the famous shipyards of Galila, and the eccentric nature of its citizens. On this particular day, the citizens of world-famous Port Island had only one thing on their minds. The latest musical wonder to hit the Grand Line, Soul King, was going to be performing tonight where the old Frankie house had been. Many rumors surrounded the mysterious musician. Some said he could charm you into a world of his own design, others that he was a chronic womanizer, and some even claimed he had come back from the dead with music he stole from Kami himself. As with all rumors, legends and myths, there was truth to them all. In private parlor in the mansion where the town's mayor and owner of the island's shipyard, Iceberg, sat 5 figures quietly enjoying a light lunch and tea as they discussed the upcoming events. The first and by the most ordinary member of the group was a tall, blue-purple hair cut short at the back and sides. His lips matched the color of her hair and a thick growth of dark stubble covering the lower third of his neutral face. He was dressed in plain, black 3-piece suit with a bright orange shirt with the first 3 buttons undone and expensive black dress shoes. A small mouse peeked out from the breast pocket of his jacket as his free hand fed it a small piece of cheese while the other held a steaming cup of tea. 3 of other members of the party were strange by human standard due to their long arms, which had 2 elbows which allowed them to bend in ways no human arm could. The first, the strongest of the 3, was a tall, stout man with long spiky, black hair meant to resemble half of a childishly drawn sun. His large, flat nose and large mouth lay above a large black beard that resembled the tail of a large bird. The second, the tallest, was more compact than his muscular comrade with a long, thin face with dirty blonde hair done up in 2 small ponytails. The last and shortest of the 3 was of relatively average build with a large, round head with large, fat cheeks were topped with long, thick, black hair. Each slowly drank from their cups as the first man spoke. "It's an honor to meet you, Soul King," purple-haired man said in a lazy drone. "No, the honor is all mine, Iceberg-san," said the last of the five politely as he sipped on his tea. He was by far the tallest of group, his stick-like figure standing just short of 9 feet, dressed plain black two-piece suit with a high-collared orange shirt and bright blue cravat. His large black afro, topped with a simple black top hat, wobbled as he lifted his head to meet the purple-haired man's gaze with empty black sockets. The forever grinning skull of the skeleton man seemed to grow as he set down his cup with a hand of bones that impossibly held together. "It's not every day that I get to see a friend of one of my dear nakama. Oh, but I don't have eyes to see. Yo-ho-ho-ho." The skeleton laughed merrily at the old joke. Skull joke. Iceberg smiled warmly at the elderly skeleton's eccentric behavior. "How are they these days anyway, Soul King-san?" "Please, I prefer Brook Iceberg-san," said the elderly skeleton, his jaw clinging with each word before sighing deeply. "Alas, I am sorry to say I have not seen them in quite some time, but knowing them," he begun before a blinding light filled the sky outside and illuminate the office in a brilliant blue light. The skeleton stood, grabbing the purple cane leaning against his chair and dropped into a defensive stance all before Iceberg and his managers could react. "Peace, Soul King," came a new voice as the light faded, causing Brook and Iceberg to turn from the window to find a man standing in the doorway dressed in a blue cloak with long sea green hair tied up in a ponytail. "Don't worry about the light, that was my doing." Brook's face, skull took on a semblance of a scowl for a second before his eternal smile returned as he saw everything around them, including his managers, were frozen in time. "It is a pleasure to see you again, Trident-sama," the skeleton said, bowing at the hip to the newcomer. "Has my time finally come?" Trident waved his hand dismissively. Oi, enough with the formalities, Brook-kun, and no, it's not your time. I'm merely here with an offer for you and Mr. Iceberg." "Of course, Trident-sama," the walking bone pile said as he stood up straight again. Not meaning to interrupt, "But who are you and what's this offer you speak of?" Iceberg asked, his usual lazy drone replaced with confusion. "And how do you know the Soul King?" "My apologies, Iceberg-san," said the skeleton, turning to the confused shipwright. "Allow me to introduce Trident-sama, Kami of the Sea," the skeleton said, causing the most powerful man in Water 7's eyes to widen in disbelief. "I met him when I died 50 years ago before I came back." "Oi, don't go spreading it around. I get enough stick from the Shinigami for allowing the Yomi fruit even exist," the newcomer said, slightly annoyed. "But what your skeletal friend said is correct about who and what I am, so I suggest you listen to my offer and keep quiet till I'm done or ask for your input." "Of course, Trident-sama," Brook exclaimed while Iceberg just nodded slowly, his gaze fixed cautiously on Trident. "Good. Now first I must say that my intentions here are mostly selfish. You see, I have grown tired of the festering and stagnant body that has control over my seas, and I wish to change that," the Kami of the Sea said tiredly as he sat in a vacant seat, facing the only two in the room who could move. "Now I am forbidden by divine law from directly interfering with anything in this world except for matters of the sea, its currents, weather, and deciding who wields my powers in most cases. So I have chosen your crew, Brook, for a mission that will last at least 10 years, to train in a world where I can directly help you train and grow stronger, even remove a few of your crew's greatest weaknesses," the immortal said, fixing a piercing gaze onto the skeleton. "In exchange for my help, I want your nakama to do what they wanted to do from the start. Find Roger's treasure and start the end war on this tyrannical government." He sighed, rubbing his temples tiredly. "As for you, Iceberg-kun, well, I have a promise to keep. An old friend is waiting for you in the other world, your old mentor Tom-kun," he said, reaching into his coat to produce a photograph from the folds of his cloak before handing it to the purple-haired shipwright. Iceberg froze when his eyes saw the photo's occupant, a giant, round, yellow-skinned man with a large white beard and 2 small yellow horns on his forehead stood grinning at the camera as he worked on building a wall to a large building. "That picture was taken in the world I wish to send Brook and yourself," the sea green-haired man said, watching Iceberg with a critical eye. "So my question to you both is, will you go to this new world to train to fix this world and be with your friends again?" Brook looked at Iceberg, who nodded slowly, still stunned by the weight of what he was being offered. "We agree, but Trident-sama, I must ask, how are we going to get away? I mean, Iceberg-san is the mayor of Water 7 and head of its ports, and I'm in the middle of a world tour." The immortal simply smiled. "It's simple. Northeast Coast, in front of Frankie House, Water 7. 11:55 p.m. A crowd of thousands of men and women, young and old from Water 7 and the surrounding islands screamed their appreciation as the man they came to see finished his latest song, grinning his eternal grin at the crowds. Yo-ho-ho-ho, it does my heart good to see you all gathered to hear my music. Oh, but I don't have a heart. Yo-ho-ho-ho. The Soul King exclaimed, dressed in his colorful trousers, black jacket, high-collared white shirt, blue cravat, bright orange feather boa and a wide-rimmed hat decorated with a crown. Skull joke, shouted the crowd in response to the eccentric musician. Ah, but I cannot take all the credit for this performance. No small amount of thanks must go to Mayor Iceberg for allowing us in your wonderful city. Come and take a bow. Brooke exclaimed before Iceberg appeared from backstage, dressed in an expensive black three-piece suit and bright blue shirt, standing next to Brooke and bowed slightly, scratching the back of his head, seemingly embarrassed by all the attention as the crowd cheered wildly at the town's hero. And also I'd like to make an announcement, he said, spying the Marines watching him from the back. You all know me as the Soul King, master of music and entertainment, but that is not who I really am, said the skeleton, noting the Marines and his managers stiffen. My name is Dead Bones Brooke, musician to the future Pirate King, Monkey D. Luffy and his crew the Straw Hat Pirates. He paused, noting the stunned faces of his adoring fans and the Marines raising their guns before being tackled by nearby fans. I am sorry to have deceived you all this past year, but I must now say my final message and song before I leave to join my nakama. The skeleton said, drawing in a deep breath. In 1 year my Taiko and crew will return, stronger than ever, so get ready world for the return of Straw Hat Pirates. He shouted with pride, the crowd cheering wildly at their idol. Iceberg-san, would you help me with one last song? Brooke asked, a small tear in his eye socket as he turned to the mayor of Water 7. I would be honored, Brooke-san, he said, and took a spare microphone that was offered to him by a nearby stagehand as the music began to play. Oh yeah, Kodomo. Uru Au no Hanashi. Oni Naru Otoko no Hanashi. Itsumo Senkyu wa Matanshi. Funbat Bisan ni Hadashi. Oh yeah, come on baby. English translation. Oh yeah, children. This is the story of a hero. The story of a man who will become king. In war there are no do-overs. But he stands firm with sandals on his bare feet. Oh yeah, come on baby. The fans cheered on the pair as the Marines wrestled with those closest to them to try and get their rifles free. Yumi oibito wa Naomi. Tokidoki wa Tarinai Richi. Jabunta Mukio Tsukini Sono Sake ni. Susumu Tame ni. Dreamers always struggle. Because sometimes their dreams are out of reach. You have to battle your own demons. In order to live through the days, the fans were pushed back as the Marines' reinforcements arrived. Sono te ni amariso na ukisugiru yumi. Eitsu ga iraba kanauku ga shita. It's a dream that seems quite a handful. But when he mentioned it, I could see it come true. The Marines raised their rifles as a third man appeared behind the singing pair, his face and body concealed in a deep blue cloak. Today is the day. Maki kudaberta z. Kimijika na oritachi ni mo yuru wa iranai. Today is the day. Psycho no ji da z. Tomateta toke ni kari irt yar. For the new world. For the new world. For the new world. Sakai wa kawaru. Today is the day. We got tired of waiting. We don't need nights because we're short-tempered. Today is the day. It's a great day. Kick the cloak that was stopped. For the new world. For the new world. For the new world. The world is gonna change. The Marines pulled the trigger just as the newcomer touched Brooke and Iceberg's shoulders, blinding the crowd in a brilliant blue light. When the clock midnight the light faded, revealing the trio had vanished just as the 1-year anniversary of the end of Marineford had arrived. 5 years after Kyuubi attack, outskirts of Konoha. In the 5 years since the Kyuubi no Kitsune had attacked the ninja village of Konohagakure no Sato, only recently fully rebuilt, and it had settled into a peaceful idleness that came in times of peace. Well as peaceful as a ninja village that hosted one of the strangest and rowdiest clans in the Elemental Nationals, the Shikiingusu Sea Kings and its many families. The otherwise sleepy village had little qualm with the rowdy ex-pirates and Marines save for one blemish which they constantly protected and sheltered whenever they tried to rid themselves of it. This creature that they hated with such ferocity was a small, 5-year-old child with a mess of spiky blonde and cerulean blue eyes that were filled with confusion, fear and yet unbreakable hope. 3 thick scars ran along the length of each of his cheeks, giving him the appearance of having whiskers like that of a cat of dog or fox. This small child was Uzumaki Naruto, the unwilling and unknowing jailer of the Kyuubi and one of the most notorious pranksters in Konoha. To say today was a bad day for Naruto was like saying that saying Maida guy was only mildly obsessed about youth. Youth, came a cry from somewhere in the village, causing many to cringe in fear and a few ninjas to run in the other direction. Naruto was currently running for his life, being chased from a mob of angry and mostly drunk villagers wielding torches and any weapons that they could find. Today was the anniversary of the Kyuubi attack and Naruto's birthday, and like every year the morons who could never distinguish between the poor boy and the demon trapped in his gut were out in force for the annual fox hunt. Though the once 100 mass now reduced to a mere 30 after a purging of their members the year prior when Naruto had run into the head chef and elder of the Shikiengusu. In years prior to the last they had been thwarted when the boy drew too close to the Shikiengusu compound and one of the clan's members had ushered the boy inside. While the mob were always frenzied and some were too stupid to think, few dared to go against anyone in a clan that had men like the internationally notorious Pirate King, Galdi, Roger, or the infamous Edward, Whitebeard, Newgate. The few that did always met an end that no man, woman or child would wish on anyone, often reduced to little more than a bloody smear on the pavement or in a coma, which many of the survivors of the previous year's hunt were still to wake from. Imagine the joy of the mob when their target in his panic had run start past the compound this year, into one of the village's many training grounds. They circled round and trapped the poor boy in a ring of angry drunks, brandishing various makeshift weapons menacingly at the young boy. A small figure dashed out before the crowd could move in for the kill, standing protectively over the young Jinchuriki. "Get out away from the demon, Hyuga-sama." A sober member of the mob called out to the young girl, her pale lavender, pupilless eyes staring defiantly at the angry mob. Her dark blue hair shone faintly in the evening light, 2 long strands framing her pale, unblemished face as she stood her ground. Why are you hurting him?" stuttered the young Hyuga. What has he ever done to deserve this?" "He killed my father," came a shout, more a drunken Chunin tightening his grip on the kunai in his hand. "He destroyed our home," shouted an elderly couple, each holding a flaming torch. "He murdered my children," cried a teary woman wielding a pitchfork. "Kill the fox," yelled a merchant in a fine silk kimono. "Burn the demon brat," they cried as they charged at the 2 defenseless children. Naruto didn't cry out for help or beg for mercy. Too exhausted and beaten to care for his own life, he simply looked up at the young girl. "Why did you help me?" he whispered, unable to understand the resolve of the girl. The young girl never got to give her answer as a bright blue light exploded into being around them, causing the charging crowd to step back in pain as the light seared their retina before they could shield their eyes. The light faded to reveal 9 new people, surrounding the 2 children, most of them looking to be about the same age as the children they had unwittingly surrounded. The one closest to the crowd, a short, raven-haired boy with a small scar under his left eye and wearing a bright yellow straw hat that was too big for him, blue denim shorts and a red vest, looked around in confusion. "Oi, where are we?" he asked in a high-pitched voice. What happened to my voice?" he squeaked in alarm. "Luffy?" asked another boy, this one with short green hair and carrying 3 swords on his right hip from a green haramaki, the blades seeming ridiculous large on such a small child, dragging along the ground behind him. His black, loose trousers tugged into tall combat boots that shone in the evening light, and his white t-shirt fitted him perfectly, showing of a muscular physique that seemed alien on such a young child. "Why do you look like a kid? You're one to talk shitty, Marimo. And what the hell did you do to your shitty swords to make them so big?" growled a blond boy, his long hair covering his left eye and the visible right eye had an eyebrow that curled at the right end. His 3-piece suit was immaculate, as was his light blue shirt and black tie. Despite his young age he seemed remarkably comfortable in the formal attire. He reached for the lollipop that he had in his mouth, staring at it in disgust before crying out in rage and despair, "What the hell is this shitty thing?" he yelled, glaring at the offending sweet treat. "It seems to be a lollipop, Sanji-kun, and I hate to break it to you, but Zoro and Luffy aren't the only ones," said a young girl with bright orange hair, dressed in a simple blue t-shirt, denim shorts and heeled sandals. A strange blue ink tattoo covering her left bicep. "I mean even Frankie and Robin are kids," she said, indicating to a young tanned, raven-haired girl who seemed only about a year older than the Erangel, dressed in a lavender blouse, purple trousers and violet heels. The boy, again only seeming to be about a year older than the Erangel, stood several inches taller than the Erangel. His light blue hair stood up in unruly spikes above his long face with an odd-shaped triple chin and dressed only in a flowery yellow shirt and navy blue speedos. Foo, it would seem Navigator San is correct, it seems Trident San turned us into children as we crossed over, chuckled the amused raven-haired girl. It's super to see you all again, exclaimed the speedo-wearing child, leaning to his left as he brought his unnaturally thick forearms together, the two dark blue star tattoos on them combining to form another star. Yo-ho-ho-ho-ho, laughed the tallest boy, a stick-thin boy, about a year older than the raven-haired girl and light blue-haired boy. A small black afro sitting above his cheerful face, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses anchored in his afro by a string of yellow beads, a vivid scar in the shape of an omega spanning half his forehead. He was dressed in a slightly worn two-piece suit with a high-collared orange shirt, tied with a large blue cravat and a large top hat resting precariously on his afro, increasing his height further. It seems that even at such a young age Frankie San's fashion sense is as shocking as ever. I can hardly believe my eye. Oh but, you can't say that anymore Brooke, you don't seem to be just bones anymore. A long-nosed boy with a mane of curly black hair held in place by a yellow and black bandana. He was dressed in dark brown overalls that showed his toned arms and chest with dark yellow boots and a messenger bag slung over his shoulder. You don't look any different Usopp, even when you were, the green-haired boy began before something tugged at his trousers, drawing his and the surrounding crowd's attention down to a small brown creature, barely the size of a newborn baby, dressed in a pair of dark brown shorts and balancing a pink top hat that was too large for his head on its antlers. Zoro, I'm scared, the creature said, his voice trembling as his eyes watered, stunning the slack-jawed mob. Hey, it's okay Chopper, said the green-haired child, Zoro, his stern face softening as he picked up the small creature, setting him on his shoulders. He turned to the stunned mob, scowling angrily, what the fuck are you looking at? He growled, the crowd briefly getting the flash of a dark figure standing behind him. Give us the fox, a woman called out, snapping the mob out of its trance as they readied their weapons. Give us you demon brat and that thing so we can purge the world of them and you can walk away, said the merchant in the silk kimono. Just give them to us so we can do the right thing, he said, smiling condescending at the children, his tone that superior and arrogant. The shock experienced by the crowd when the green-haired boy drew one of his swords from its blood-red sheath was only eclipsed by the fear they felt as an aura of poor demonic hate saturated the air. The boy set the pink-hatted creature down behind him and dropped into a combat stance in front of it. Luffy? He asked, looking over his shoulder at the raven-haired boy wearing the oversized straw hat who nodded slowly. The boy grinned wickedly, holding his sword high in the air. Itorio, Sanjiroku Po, chanted Zoro but stopped when he felt a presence as dark as his own to his right. Guys, we have company, he growled, turning to look into the trees where Luffy and Sanji were already looking. A loud clapping filled the air as a lone figure stepped out of the darkness of the trees, the air around him seemed to shimmer with power as he advanced on them. The eyes of the children who had recently arrived widened in shock as they gazed at the man, taking in his tall, muscular frame dressed in an half-open dark green kimono held shut by a crimson haramaki, revealing a scarred chest of solid muscle. He wore black trousers that were tugged into black combat boots with two katana hanging from his waist, one a shockingly familiar blood red and the other jet black, seeming to absorb all light. His handsome face set in an amused smile, barely lifting the corner of his mouth as dark eyes watched the scene before him while his short crimson hair moved. On a gentle breeze. Kenji of the Blood Moon, gasped one of the crowd, causing Zoro's jaw and hands to clench tightly. Now what might you all be doing here, surrounding 11 innocent children? Asked the swordsman, his voice deep and gruff like Zoro's as an adult. Now you wouldn't be trying to hurt them now would too? Because I don't like bullies, in fact I hate any scum who would pick on those weaker than them, he said calmly, an aura of barely controlled violence surrounding him, like a demon waiting to strike out. We're here to exact our revenge on the demon brat Uzumaki and kill that creature he summoned. Shouted a brave or incredibly stupid civilian, the crowd parting so that the swordsman could pass. The Straw Hats all surrounded Chopper, who had spotted the beaten and exhausted form of Naruto when the swordsman had appeared and was treating him while the young Hyuga tried her best to help. I think his friends may take an exception to that, Kenji said, coming to a stop in front of the green-haired child, kneeling so he was at the boy's eye level. Zoro met his gaze with a deep scowl, his hand gripping his katana tightly, the edge shining with a violent purple light as it reflected the sun. Your sword hungers for blood, doesn't it, little Marimo? The swordsman said, his stern expression softening to an almost fatherly gaze. He scanned the faces of the other children, all ready to fight if he or the crowd gave them reason. Now tell me, was this creature that they want dead, that small tanuki behind you? He asked the Zoro. The boy stiffened, almost giving in to the blade in his hand's urge to drink blood, but instead moved so he stood between the man and his friend. Yes, Kenji-sama, he said coldly, the equal parts respect and animosity he showed for the stranger, causing his friends to look at him like he had grown a fourth head instead of the occasional three. The swordsman chuckled darkly. You haven't called me that one before, he said, sighing heavily. I suppose I deserve it, he said regretfully, turning to look at the crowd. Did they happen to call the kid behind you anything strange by any chance? He asked, indicating to Naruto's unconscious form, receiving a nod from Zoro after a thoughtful pause. They called him Fox and Demon Brat, the green-haired boy grunted, still showing his disdain for the man in front of him. Kenji nodded slowly and stood slowly, turning to face the surrounding crowd. Very well. Step back, Sandai is tame compared to his older brothers, the swordsman said quietly so only the children could hear. Zoro's eyes widened in something akin to fear. What the hell does that mean? The Erangel yelled at the pair of swordsmen, and who you hell are you? Woman, for once in your life just shut up and stay close to the others. Zoro barked, turning to his nakama, looking truly afraid. He's going to unleash a monster, he said darkly, confusing the others, but they kept quiet, having never seen their swordsmen so scared in their time together. They quickly huddled around Chopper, the Hyuga and Naruto protectively as they watched the adult swordsman slowly draw his blade from its red sheath, releasing a powerful wave of sheer killing intent from the blade. Zoro's hand shook violently as he tightened his grip on the squirming blade in his hand, his nails biting deeply enough into his palm to draw blood, the crimson drops dripping from his curled fingers. For breaking the law put into place by the Sandaime Hokage 5 years ago, I hereby instill the greatest punishment the law allows, death. Kenji said gravely, his entire body tensing. Itoryu, Sanjiroku Rengoku no Hime asterisk. Kenji chanted and disappeared from sight, and in an instant appeared behind the mob, flicking his sword to rid it of blood before sheathing the blade slowly. As the last of the blade vanished with an audible click, the mob exploded into screams of agony just before they fell where they stood, sliced into hundreds of gory bits. Even the most seasoned of the Straw Hats paled and grew sick at the field of carnage around them, while the young Hyuga girl was struggling to keep herself from heaving up her lunch. Come with me, I'd best take you to the clan compound, Yuta Hyuga, he said without turning to the children, all completely clean of blood. Bring Naruto with you, the doc will want to look at him, he said calmly, indicating to the unconscious blonde between them before walking toward the village. Zoro nodded slowly and silently hefted the unconscious blonde onto his shoulder before lifting a terrified Chopper up and perched him on his head. Oi, Marimo, where the fuck do you think you're going? Why the fuck should we trust this guy? Zoro turned to face Sanji. Simple dartboard, he just saved Chopper's life, he said dully, looking to Luffy, coming Taiko. Luffy nodded to his first mate and they both set out after Kenji. It seems we must follow. After all, we did agree to stand by Luffy-san from the beginning, the tallest boy, Brook said sagely before setting off after his captain. Oi, skeleton, wait for us, the blue-haired child, Frankie, called after their musician. He was quickly followed by Usopp, who wished to stay as close to the strongest members of the crew as possible. Coming Navigator-san, the raven-haired girl, Robin, asked her orange-haired friend. Don't have much of a choice, do we? Oi, wait for us, called out the Erangel, Nami, as they dashed after them. Sanji grumbled, realizing that he had been outvoted. Shitty swordsman, always causing trouble, he grumbled as he followed his friends. Outside Shikiangusu compound, outskirts of Konoha, Kenji signaled for the children to stop as they reached a set of giant navy metal gates that seemed to vibrate with a power all too familiar to the Straw Hats. 2 giant sea serpents were engraved into each door, their baneful eyes staring at the children hungrily. Before we continue, let me lay down some ground rules. The 2 sword-wielding swordsmen said calmly, turning to look at the children. First of all, don't ask any questions. Most will all be answered when you meet our clan heads, he stated calmly, noting the look's curiosity that he was receiving from the Straw Hats. Second, do not touch or take anything that is not yours. Lastly, don't wander off, stay close to me at all times. If you follow these rules, then we'll get along just fine. If you don't, well, he said, pausing as he let their imaginations work. All save Luffy, Raven and Zoro, blanched slightly. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, he said finally, smirking wickedly for effect, but a slight smirk pulled at the edge of his mouth, showing his barely contained amusement at the faces the Straw Hats. He turned from the suitably scared children to the large gates. Oi! Open up, he called out to someone inside. It's Kenji. Got some brats here with me, one of them needs medical help. A silence filled the air for several seconds before the deep blue gates groaned and slowly opened by an unseen force. The Straw Hats gasped at what awaited them at the other side. 3 large buildings, each carefully crafted from aged timber and painted in their captain's colors. The legendary ship's Moby Dick, a colossal ship with the entire front third of the ship carved and painted in the likeness of a blue whale. The Oro Jackson, a smaller deep red vessel with golden trimmings with 2 golden mermaids alongside the forward cannon as its figurehead, and a smaller version of the floating restaurant Barati, a sea green building with 3 levels and a large white fish head for its figurehead. Each ship was stripped of its sail, but the colors of their captains still flew proudly from their main masts, along with a second flag that the children couldn't quite make out. Are those? Frankie stammered, looking in awe at the magnificent ships, half sunken into the ground, in front of him. Your questions will be answered soon, boy. For now please keep quiet. Kenji interrupted, smirking at the odd expression on the young pirates' faces. Yuki, he said calmly, a woman, barely in her 30s, appearing behind him with lustrous long hair as white as virgin snow. She was dressed in black forming-fitting clothes that left her shoulders bare with metal armor plates sewn onto the material and a simple white mask with a pale blue snowflake under her right eye covering her face. She stiffened when she saw the children, her eyes resting on Robin for the longest time. Are the Senchus here? The woman pulled her gaze from the Straw Hats to the crimson-haired swordsman. Hi Kenji-san, she said, her voice giving off the impression she was smiling behind her white mask. Good, tell them we have guests and ask them to meet us in the council chambers as soon as they can. Kenji said, his expression softening for a moment as he looked at the masked woman, and send for the Hokage and retrieve the children from the academy. The woman bowed. Hi, Kenji-san, she said before vanishing in a swirl of leaves, causing the children to gasp in awe and Luffy's eyes to sparkle with joy. Keep close, especially you little Marimo, I know all about your lack of direction, the swordsman said, smirking knowingly down at Zoro before walking toward the Oro Jackson. It's not my fault that everything keeps moving, grumbled Zoro as he adjusted the blonde on his shoulder before he, his crew and the Hyuga girl followed Kenji. But that's impossible, Zoro, came a tiny voice from on top of his head as Chopper clung onto his green hair tightly. Zoro merely grumbled quietly as they reached the deep red ship of the old pirate king and entered through beautiful double doors that had been cut into the hull that was half buried into the earth. The inside was surprising spacious with vast, bright, airy rooms, some filled with shelves of scrolls, others weapons that seemed to vibrate with power. They were led past all these rooms to a larger room toward the aft of the vessel with comfortable leather couches and bar filled with a wide variety of delights, alcoholic and not in equal measure. A large set of simply decorated double door waited for them at the other side of the room. Wait here until you're summoned, don't break anything, Kenji ordered the children, looking at Sanji, Zoro and Luffy as he finished. He turned to the Hyuga girl as he took Naruto from Zoro's shoulder. Come with me, Hinata-san, we'd best let the doc look at your friend, he said, offering the scared young girl his hand. The young bluette girl, Hyuga Hinata, hesitantly took the man's hand before he led her out the room, collecting Naruto from Zoro, carrying him over his broad shoulder. Closing the door they had come through with barely a noise. All the remaining children turned as one to their green-haired friend, some glaring, others curious and in the case of the long-nosed child, terror. All right Marimo, what the hell was that? Yelled the well-dressed blonde, glaring daggers at the unfazed swordsman. What was what arrow cook? Zoro asked calmly, unfastening his swords from his belt as he took a seat on a couch, resting his 3 deadly blade against his shoulder as he lay back into the soft leather before closing his eyes. Don't give us that, Zoro, you know exactly what he means. Growled the orange-haired girl, Nami, dangerously. Why the hell did you follow that guy? Do you know him? Who is he? The angry girl demanded, glaring at the laid-back swordsman. Zoro cracked open his left eye, drawing the crew's eyes to the vivid scar that ran from just above his eyebrow straight down to his cheekbone. The scarring showing that it had cut deeply enough that there shouldn't be an eye staring at them at all. I followed him because I didn't want to fight him in the body of a 5-year-old, he stated logically, leaving his friends unable to refute his reasoning. Yes, I do know him, and it's none of your business as to how I know. The green-haired boy growled at Nami, releasing a burst of killing intent that caused her to step back in fear. Ah, come on, Zoro, whined Luffy childishly, matching the pout on his face as he tried to keep the straw hat on his head from slipping off his smaller head. Please. Yeah, come on, Zoro, who is he? Asked the small antlered tanuki on his head, jumping off and depositing himself on the swordsman's lap, his large round puppy dog eyes staring up at the green-haired boy. Zoro sighed heavily. Fine, he said, defeated, straightening slightly as he looked at his nakama with a worn expression that seemed odd on his boyish features. The name he's known by in the Grand Line was Kenji of the Slaughter, he stated emotionlessly, his face a stoic mask as Robin and Frankie's faces paled while the others looked at him confused. He had a bounty of 500 million berry and was a member of Gold Roger's crew. He continued, ignoring the shocked and awestruck looks from his crewmates. As for how I know him, well, he began before the door at the far end of the room opened. The Senchus will see you now, Kenji said from a set of double doors opposite the ones that they had entered through, turning on his heel, indicating for them to follow him inside. Zoro sighed heavily, lifting Chopper up onto his head again, worried that he might be trodden on. I'll tell you later, he said quietly as he rose, slipping his swords into his haramaki before following Kenji, his nakama quickly following after him, keeping close in case of an attack. The council chamber was a large, airy room, receiving plenty of light, the giant thick glass skylight above. 3 simple yet beautifully made dark oak thrones, each engraved with images of impossible battles and creatures. 3 men lunged lazy in them, each looking at the straw hats with a slight smile as Kenji stood between and behind the center and right thrones, while a blonde-haired man with a familiar goatee stood between the left and center thrones. The one who sat on the throne to the right could only be described as a giant made of solid muscles and sinew, hidden only by loose black trousers held up with a scarlet sash, black sea boots and a black bandana with a single metal plate, engraved with a strange spiral leaf, kept his long blonde locks out of his eyes. A white captain's coat hung from the back of his chair. His long, stern face was set in a fatherly smile as he looked at the children, curling along the crescent mustache on his top lip. It is good to see you again, Straw Hat, he said, looking at Luffy with an amused smile. The straw hat-wearing boy grinned broadly, taking up half his face. Long time no see, Whitebeard G-san, shishishi. Figures that you would know the brat, said the man in the left throne in amusement. He was dressed in chef whites, with a ridiculously tall chef hat atop his long blonde hair that was tied into a single simple braid. His rugged features were doing a better job of hiding the smile that had formed under his braided mustache, and I see he's picked up a lot more brats since I last saw him. Sanji stood, slack-jawed as he looked at the grisly old chef, shitty geezer. Is that you? He asked, stunned. Well, who else would it be, brat? He asked irritably, but his smile widened on his worn face. I take it that these are the kids Trident told us about? Asked the last man, drawing the straw hat's attention and caused their eyes to widen. He was the shortest of the men, but by only a few inches, his cheerful face decorated with a large black mustache that ran down to meet his sideburns. He was dressed in a tight-fitting dark green t-shirt, black trousers tugged into black sea boots, a long crimson captain's coat hung from his shoulders and a dark yellow headband with a single metal plate over his forehead. The same strange leaf that had been on Whitebeard's bandana engraved into the metal, held his held mane of messy black hair out of his eyes. Hi, there's no mistaking them, these brats are the Straw Hats, Roger, the chef said, fixing his eyes on Sanji with a warm smile. Roger nodded, looking at Whitebeard, who in turn nodded slowly. Oi. Kenji, these kids the real deal? He asked, looking over his shoulder at the crimson-haired swordsman. "Hi Roger Sencho." The swordsman answered respectfully to Roger, causing the captain's grin to widen. The Pirate King slowly stood. "I'm sure you all have so many questions, but trust me that they will be answered in time, but for now there are some people who have been wanting to meet you since we arrived in this village," he said and clapped his hands loudly, causing the doors behind the Straw Hats to open wide. The Straw Hats turned quickly and froze, stunned, while several teared up at the crowd waiting for them. Unsurprisingly, it was Luffy who broke the silence as he dashed toward two boys about the same age that flanked a beautiful woman with long, shining light pink hair. The first was a small blonde 8-year-old boy dressed in bright blue shorts, blue polo shirt opened at the top to show the developing muscles underneath, black open-toed sandals and a large navy blue jacket with a skull, with the strange spiral leaf that Roger and Whitebeard had worn painted onto the forehead, stitched onto the back. He grinned broadly, revealing a chipped tooth as Luffy tackled him, knocking the top hat that had been perched on his head off. The second boy smirked as he watched the poor blonde being crushed in a hug by a teary Luffy. "You never changed, do you, Luffy?" the boy asked, removing his hands from his black shorts pockets. His red t-shirt bore the kanji for independence on the chest. The same skull that the blonde worn on his jacket was on the back of the boy's t-shirt, and the same style of sandals covered his feet. A warm smile spread across his face as Luffy turned to look at him through tearing eyes, taking in his freckled cheeks, confident stance and mop of black hair pushed to the sides topped with a dark orange cowboy hat. "Ace!" he cried as he looked at the black-haired boy and then back at the blonde who was grinning warmly, his eyes watering slightly at seeing the straw hat-wearing boy. "Sabo! I missed you guys so much!" he cried happily, hugging them both, clinging onto them tightly, fearful that they might disappear. "We've missed you too, Luffy." The blonde-haired child, Sabo said quietly, wiping away a few strange tears. "Come on, you big baby, stop crying and tell me about your adventures. I don't believe half the stories that Ace has told me," Sabo said, managing to calm Luffy enough for him to start telling him the ridiculous adventures that his nakama and he had been through. The woman the boys had stood next to smiled warmly as she decided to give them space, walking over to Roger, who was seated on his throne again, sitting across his lap. "Kenji-san, why don't you join them? I'm sure you and the boy have a lot to catch up on," Roger said to his swordsman, who nodded, breaking off to join the weeping and laughing reunion. The blonde that had stood to the opposite side had already gone to the three boys, kneeling as Luffy hugged him. Shortly after Luffy had dived at Ace and Sabo, the rest of the Straw Hats darted toward the other members of the crowd. A teary Chopper was clinging desperately to the face man dressed in bright pink trousers, a green shirt and a white doctor's coat. The man's hair shot out in three thick pole-like masses of hair at right angles to each other. The man cried happily as he held the small pirate, his apologies barely discernible between his sobs. Nami had dove at a woman dressed in a navy t-shirt and trousers that hugged her curvy figure, with the skull the boys had on their clothes stitched onto the front, partially hidden by the thick dark green flak jacket she wore with a multitude of pockets. Her pretty face, fixed in a teary smile, was topped with a strange haircut, the sides cut short so a thick mohawk-like strip of red-violet hair ran along the top of her head from her slight fringe to a long ponytail at the base of her neck. A small lavender-haired girl, about the same age as Ace and Sabo, was also pulled into a warm hug as the woman held both her surrogate daughters tightly to her for the first time in years. Usopp for his part was being carried by a pale, dark green-haired woman with a long nose so like his own as he cried loudly into her shoulder. The woman smiled warmly as she held the crying child, her own eyes heavy with unshed tears as she whispered reassurance to her son. Sanji simply walked up to the chef sitting on his throne and quickly began telling of his adventures, earning a proud smile from the grizzled old ex-pirate turned chef. Brook was hugging a blonde boy wearing a green trench coat, white cowboy hat, black shorts and boots. The thin boy quickly began to tell the blonde the story of his long life, the blonde's face saddening as he listened to the stories of his time alone in the Florian Triangle. A warm smile quickly replaced his frown as Brook regaled the Straw Hats' adventures through the Grand Line, both from memory and hearsay. Robin slowly walked up to the woman that had appeared at the gate, her mask now tied to her hip to reveal a face that mirrored Robin in her older body. A large, round, elderly man with thick arms made of solid muscle stood to the side, his bright orange hair and beard forming a mane similar to a lion's. He was dressed in simple khaki shorts, black open-toed sandal, a navy blonde t-shirt with the same skull and leaf as the others and a dark green flak jacket, standing as tall as the giant man Whitebeard. She stopped before the snow-haired woman, her stoic mask cracking as she looked up at the pair as the white-haired woman knelt so she was level with the raven-haired girl. They stared into each other's eyes for a long moment before the woman enveloped Robin in a warm embrace, her tears finally falling as they held each other tightly. The giant man knelt and drew both into a bear hug, causing the young girl to laugh for the first time since her crew had been separated. A long chorus of "Dereshishi" filled the air as the man laughed and cried in the same instant. Frankie was less reserved and shot forward a split second after his captain to tackle a large, round, yellow-skinned man who stood as tall as Whitebeard. He grabbed fistfuls of the colorful shirt that the man wore along with his black shorts and black work boots. The man smiled warmly at the blue-haired boy, wrapping his arms tightly around the boy as a purple-haired boy the same age as Sabo stood next to them smiling warmly before cries of "Don" and "Super" came from the two. The last to step forward was Zoro, slowly marching toward a man with a kind-faced man, with long green-black hair tied back in a ponytail, round spectacles flashing in the light as he smiling warmly at the young swordsman. His gray kimono carrying the same skull insignia as the other clan members. Koshiro-sensei. The green-haired boy greeted the man with a slight bow, smiling slightly at his old teacher. Zoro-kun. The man said, his voice warm and kind, "How have you been?" "I've been well, sensei." Zoro answered before turning to look at the girl standing to Koshiro's right. She was around 9 years old, about the same age as when he had last seen her. Dark blue hair slightly longer, now reaching his shoulders, framed her defiant face. She was dressed in a dark gray t-shirt with the same skull insignia as her father, forest green loose trousers and black open-toed sandals. He pulled the white katana from his green haramaki before bowing before her and presented it to her. "Time I return this," he said gruffly. The girl's face shifted into a warm smile. "Baka, I can't take that back. How else are you going to do that 3-sword style that you said you'd make?" Zoro shook his head. "I'll find another sword." "How? The swords here are nowhere near as high a quality as where we come from," she asked as she reluctantly took the sword from her green-haired rival. "I believe I have the answer to that problem, little Kuina-chan," a deep voice said from behind Zoro as Kenji walked up to the three. "Ah, Kenji-san, it is good to see you again." Koshiro greeted politely. "Likewise, Koshiro-san," Kenji said, bowing his head slightly to his fellow swordsman. "Kenji-sensei," Kuina said respectfully, causing Zoro to smirk at his rival. "What do you mean you can help? Surely you don't mean you're going to give up one of your swords to the Baka?" she asked, curious as to the usually stoic man's offer to help. "I mean you hardly know him," she said quickly as the taller of the swordsmen fixed her with a lazy gaze. "I would have to agree with Kuina on this, Kenji-san. It does seem odd of you to help a stranger," Kuina's father said, curious at his friend's sudden show of generosity. Both of swordsmen simply smiled at them knowingly. "Hardly know him. Oh, old friend, you couldn't be more wrong," Kenji said, chuckling lightly. "I never did tell you my family name, did I? My name is Rorinoa Kenji and the little Marimo is my son," he said proudly as a silence filled the room. Kenji and Zoro both slowly turned to look at the others, noting the wide-eyed expressions on the faces of everyone except Robin, her mother, Roger and the woman on his lap, who all held an amused smile or in Roger's case a large grin. Infirmary, Shikiingusu compound. While the Straw Hats were having their teary reunion, another encounter was taking place not far from the council chamber, toward the prow of the Oro Jackson where the infirmary was located. The spacious and airy room was filled with advanced medical equipment, half of which had never been seen anywhere else in the elemental nations and the rest were too rare or expensive for most hospitals. A row of simple white cot beds were lined orderly along one wall, all empty save one where a single blonde child rested. A strange woman with the body of a 20-year-old fashion model, but yet her face was lined with deep wrinkles and laugh lines. She had a long, hooked nose that gave her the look of an old hag despite the mischievous sparkle that always danced in her eyes. She knelt next to the bed, her hands glowing a pleasant light green as they hovered over the young boy's body. "You stupid boy, why didn't you come here earlier?" the crone whispered softly, her concerned eyes looking over the quickly healing wounds that covered the boy. "We would have kept you safe." A young girl with short, dark blue hair and pale lavender eyes watched the woman as she worked on the blonde. Anyo. Kurha-sama, will Naruto-kun be alright? The young girl asked timidly, fidgeting slightly as the doctor turned her gaze onto the young girl with a warm smile that rarely crossed her face. Don't you worry girlie, the elder woman said, amused at the stuttering air of the Hyuga clan. The boy will be just fine, but I'm going to need you to be quiet while I work, okay? Hyuga Hinata nodded slowly as Dr. Kurha returned her gaze to Naruto, closing her eyes as glowing energy around her hands slowly moved down to the boy's navel. The old woman took a deep breath and closed her eyes before she slowly entered the boy's mindscape. Naruto's mindscape. Kurha opened her eyes, finding herself standing in a familiar dark, dank sewer. The insistent drip of leaking pipes filled the air as she moved through the filthy water toward her target. Two huge barred gates slowly came into view. She stopped before the red bars, looking inside to see a giant mass of orange fur that shifted slightly as it took notice of her till the head of a giant fox with huge slitted red eyes came into view from behind its 9 soft tails. Hello fuzzball, the doctor said, smirking at the giant fox who growled at the name. Hag. It growled half-heartedly, lowering its head so a giant red eye was staring lazily at her, a slight frown of curiosity creasing its brow. I take it you are here for the boy? It asked, its dark voice sounding oddly sad. Of course, she answered the Kyuubi, undaunted by the most powerful demon alive. How is he? The fox shifted, bring a single curled tail into view, unfolding it to reveal the form of a sleeping blonde-haired boy with 3 horizontal scars on each cheek who was holding on tightly to the mass of soft fur. He is surprisingly well, despite the beating he received. If it weren't for the girl and those children stalling those stupid villagers till the demon swordsman arrived. Well, even our contract wouldn't have been able to stop me from ripping them asunder. It growled angrily as the tail squeezed out of the bars, setting the boy down in the doctor's arms. May I ask who they were? They seem oddly familiar, especially the green-haired brat. It asked, surprisingly polite to the old hag. Holding a deep respect for the old crone, since he had agreed to that contract with her clan and was one of the few humans to have ever earned it. The crone smiled wistfully, and so they should. They are from my world, and if it is the boy I'm thinking of, then you only need to look at the swords at his waist to find your answer. The fox's eyes widened before an amused smirk spread across his face. Another demon has entered the fold. Things just keep on getting more interesting with your kind. Send the swordsman and the 2 old bastards my regards, crone, it said as it lowered its head onto its paws and closing its eyes, signaling that the conversation was over. What do I look like, your messenger girl fuzzball? Kurha growled irritably, sighing when she saw the fox had already fallen asleep. You always have to have the last word, she grumbled as she turned, carrying the slowly waking boy away from the caged beast. Infirmary, Shikiingusu compound. Hinata watched anxiously as the woman remained perfectly still as the tendrils of glowing green energy withdrew from Naruto and back into her hand. As the doctor opened her eyes, her patient slowly woke as well, looking round in a confused panic before he recognized the old doctor who was gently holding him down. Kurba-chan, he croaked, looking around to see the familiar, sterile room he found himself every year. What happened? You didn't come here when they started chasing, that's what happened, the woman said angrily at the blonde. What were you thinking? If it hadn't been for the young Hinata here and Kenji-san, then you could have died, you stupid boy. She growled angrily, but her eyes showed the relief she felt at seeing the young Jinchuriki was alright. Naruto smiled nervously, scratching the back of his head. Oh, sorry Kurba-chan. I got lost on the way. He chuckled nervously, before frowning in thought. Hey Kurba-chan. Yes boy. Who are those guys that appeared when that light faded? The old crone smiled warmly, her eyes looking past the boy's head, out of the window to something in the far off distance. They're brats that are very precious to my clan. We've waited along to see them again, she said wistfully before standing slowly, grabbing the bottle of umeshu nearby. Now you stay put and rest, ya hear? Otherwise I'll get out the needles again, she said sternly to Naruto, who paled, nodding quickly. Good, I'll be back later to check up on ya, she said as she headed for the door, slamming it shut behind her as she left. The 2 children sat in complete silence for a long time after the old doctor had left, one too shy to talk and the other looking at her curiously, making her feeling uncomfortable, her lap suddenly being the most interesting thing in the world. After what felt like hours but could only have been minutes, Naruto finally broke the silence. Why did you help me? Hinata looked up in surprise, meeting Naruto's blue eyes which regard her curiously before turning back to her lap, her face hidden in shadows to hide the growing blush on her cheeks. IW wanted to help you like you did for me, she stuttered timidly, poking her index fingers together nervously. The blonde rose an eyebrow in confusion at the young girl's statement, help you? When did I do that? He said, leaning forward to look at her closely before his eyes widened in recognition. You're that girl from the park with all those bullies, he exclaimed, remembering the incident that had happened less than a month ago. The young Hyuga could only nod. Why yes. You helped me so I wanted to help you, she said quietly, fidgeting under his piercing blue eyes. I'm sorry I was too weak to help, she begun sadly, freezing when she felt a hand touch her shoulder. She looked up and her pupilless lavender eyes met Naruto's cerulean blues. Thank you, Naruto said, smiling warmly at Hinata, not the fake smiles that covered half his face but a real smile. He removed his hand from her shoulder and held it out to her. Name's Uzumaki Naruto and I'm going to be Hokage, Datbayo, he said confidently, grinning from ear to ear. Hinata smiled timidly at the infectious cheer the boy exuded. Hyuga Hinata. It's a pleasure to meet you and Naruto-kun, she stuttered as she took the boy's hand, who shocked her by flipping it palm down and planted a light kiss on the back of her hand. That's a very pretty name, he said cheerful, his eyes closing at the scale of the grin on his face. A solid thump sounded, opening an eye to see the source. He found a bright red Hinata passed out on her chair. Hinata-chan, he exclaimed, checking her temperature and aggressively pressed the call button next to his bed when his hand burned slightly on contact. Outside the window, perched on a tree branch, a man with long, spiky white hair, held back from his eyes by a horned forehead protector with the kanji for oil, chuckled lightly at the young blonde's panic. He was dressed in a green short shirt, kimono and matching trousers, mostly hiding the mesh armor underneath showing only at the ends of his sleeves and trousers. His red haori moved silently by an unseen breeze as he balanced on his wooden sandals as he tried to control his laughter at the scene playing out before him. 5 years old and already knocking woman out. I'm so proud. The strange man chuckled, as he saw Kurha rush into the room to inspect Hinata. If Kushina was here she'd kill you for teaching the boy that. Jiraiya, came an elderly voice from below him. The white-haired man, now identified as Jiraiya, looked down to see the elderly face of Sarutobi Hirusen, the reinstated Sandaime Hokage, and Jiraiya's mentor staring up at him, a warm smile gracing his aged face. Yes, she probably would. Take it you're here because of what happened with the Gaki as well, he asked as he hopped off his perch to join Hiruzen below. Yes, and to talk about some newcomers to the clan, a group of children that, if rumors are to be believed, are just as much trouble as Ace-kun and Sabo-kun, grumbled the elderly Kage as they walked toward the Oro Jackson, passing Kenji and a small boy with odd green hair and carrying 2 swords on his shoulder. At least they haven't teamed up with the Gaki since that incident at the Genin exams last year. Remember the fallout? Hiruzen shivered. Don't remind me, it took me 3 weeks to go through the paperwork. How they managed to find that much tar and feathers is beyond me. Not to mention those flaming dog statues that kept falling from the sky, Jiraiya added, remembering the screams of the civilians caught in that nasty genjutsu. I mean, who the hell thinks up a jutsu like that? Sometimes I wonder if letting them join us was such a good idea. Are you kidding, sensei? I mean, with just old Whitebeard and Roger hanging around, there isn't a thing stupid enough to attack us, and with Tom and the purple-haired brat of his fixing most damages they cause when they do get rowdy, it would have been stupid to have not taken them in. True, but the amount of paperwork that came with them is killing me, groaned the elderly Kage as they reached the council hall where the senchus were waiting for them in their thrones. 2 additional seats had been retrieved for the 2 ninja, both as elegant and beautifully crafted as the 3 thrones the captains sat upon. I'm glad you could make it on such short notice, Hokage-sama, Ero Sennin. Roger greeted them, his ever-cheerful grin present on his tanned features. Jiraiya grumbled at the nickname, swearing to Kami he would get Naruto for calling him it in front of the Sencho Council of the Shikiengusu. He was a Sannin for crying out loud, a Kage-level ninja that could level villages yet couldn't seem to squeeze any form of respect out of his blonde godson. Well, considering your message, we couldn't really delay, he said, turning unusually serious as he looked at the 3 ex-pirates as he took his seat. Especially since we've waited for this for almost 5 years now, Hiruzen said slowly, taking off his cage hat, looking at it thoughtfully. It's one of the few reasons I'm still wearing this blasted thing. We understand Hiruzen-san, it mustn't have been easy for you these last few years, what with being one of the few things between the boy and the civilian council. The giant Whitebeard said, his eyes regarding the old cage with great sympathy and gratitude. But now the brats are here, we can at last start to give the boy a chance. What makes you so sure about these brats anyway, Edward? Asked Jiraiya, his eyes narrowing slightly at the captains. You barely told us anything about them, and the task they have ahead of them just seems ridiculous. While that may be true, and though I hardly know how strong they are, Zeph here does. Roger said, indicating to the blonde Viking-looking chef next to him. The blonde grumbled as he sat straighter in his seat. Well, their abilities aren't as well known as other pirates in our world. I do know some of the ridiculous things they did in the Grand Line. Zeph said, his gruff voice sounding more irritated than normal. I suppose I should start from the bottom. First we have Tony Chopper, a reindeer who ate the Hito fruit, giving him intelligent thought and a strange form that seems to be a tanuki with antlers. His abilities are mostly unknown to me, but I know from the doctors here that he is quite intelligent and has as vast an understanding of non-jutsu medical practices, poisons and medicines as the doctors here at the tender age of 15, he said, noting the stunned look on the ninjas' faces. Next we have Nami, Belmir's adopted daughter and notorious thief. It's said that she had an unnatural ability to read the slightest change in the air and predict even the most random storms at least several hours in advance. Coupled with that, a strange weapon that allows her to control the charge and pressure of the air around, and she became a force of nature, summoning lightning storms and controlling mirages to hide herself in. Her current bounty sits at 16 million berry, which equates to roughly 1.6 million ryo. Zeph continued, smirking slightly at the growing disbelief on the ninjas' faces. The third lowest bounty of the crew was to a young slingshot-wielding sniper by the name of Usopp, though he is known to the world by the alias Sogeking, sitting at 30 million berry or 3 million ryo. He was supposed to have defended his crewmates from marine swordsmen from the top of a tower 2 miles away with only an oversized slingshot, which he used on his captain's order to set fire to the world government flag, officially declaring war on them. Next is a lanky man by the name of Humming Brook with a bounty of 33 million berry or 3.3 million ryo. He is adept at a unique fencing style that relies of speed to ridiculously efficient and delayed results. Now this brat is a strange one. According to Rayleigh, he was a walking talking skeleton when he met him that has a perchance for woman's panties. Zeph said, a small perverted grin flashed across Jiraiya's face for a split second before replaced with his best poker face. The last of the minor bounties, sitting at 44 million berry or 4.4 million ryo, is Tom's apprentice Cutty Flam, alias of Cyborg Frankie, and as his alias suggests was a living weapon, rumors being that he crumbled a giant iron crane with a blast of air from one of his many weapons. Zeph finished, regarding the two men that sat with their jaws hanging loose with amusement. These were the weakest. Hiruzen asked slowly, the gears in his head working overtime to process all this information. Zeph nodded slowly, yes, the last four have bounties in excess of 70 million berry or 7 million ryo. The only one I can honestly say that I know the best is my ward Black-Leg Sanji, who now holds a bounty of 77 million berry or 7.7 million ryo, and I will say without bias probably was as strong as I am now in his late teens. His kicks were so strong that they could shatter stone and bending steel, and if rumors are to be believed, then he also had a technique that could melt iron with a single kick, he said with no small amount of pride. Satisfied by the disbelief on the two ninjas' faces, he continued. Nico Alvia's daughter's bounty sits at a large 80 million berry or 8 million ryo for having knowledge of a forgotten language that shows the true history of our world, which the government wants covered up, and has the ability to sprout body parts on any surface, often using multiple hands to twist the body in such a way that the signals going to the brain, or something, get all messed. You panned knock her targets unconscious. As for the last two, well, the green-haired brat you probably saw on the way here is Pirate Hunter Zoro, a bounty hunter turned pirate that currently holds a bounty of 120 million berry or 12 million ryo. He's said to have defeated Daz Bones, a bounty hunter with a body made of steel, by cutting straight through his steel-hard skin with a single sword strike, he said, noting the ninjas were struggling to hide their shock. Alongside that, a marine reported that he began to access his special chakra nature in our world, but the reports vary too much to say for certain the form it takes. Not to mention being the son of our own Roronoa Kenji. The last of these brats is their Captain Monkey D. Luffy, said Whitebeard, taking over from the old chef due to having personally met the boy in their world. And I can say without doubt is among one of the most dangerous men I have ever met, he said gravely, unconsciously reaching for the spot over his heart as he remembered the Paramount War. His bounty at the time we left was a healthy 300 million berry or 30 million Ryota U. He single-handedly defeated Rob Lucci, a marine dog that was known for crushing armies of pirates to sat his need for battle and blood. Alongside that he defeated the ex-Shichibukai crocodile and hundreds of warships and marines with his fists, but the most dangerous ability he has is the same Roger and I share, Haoshoku Haki. Silence filled the meeting as the ninja took in this new information, trying to imagine the power of that these children once had. Jiraiya broke the silence after several moments, and they can do that as children. Of course not, they were turned into children just like Ace, Iceberg, Nojiko and Yorkie were, but like the old saying goes, it's easier to relearn an old trick than start anew. Roger answered, drawing out a small scroll from his captain's coat. And we would like to offer a group of hand-picked students a chance to train alongside them, he said, handing the scroll to Hiruzen. For what reason? The elderly Cage asked as he looked over the scroll, noting the names and prominent clans that some came from. Well, as you know, we found it hard to grasp the nature of ninja techniques despite our strengths in other fields, so we thought it best to have children their own age with them to help them understand as they learn alongside them. Roger answered, resting his head on his fist lazily. And while they learn from them, the children also learn from you. Hiruzen finished, looking over the plans again. These are very bold plans and require a lot of preparation, we couldn't implement them for a few years. That's perfectly fine, in fact I think it best that the brats get to spend time with some of the people they might be training with, Whitebeard said, his fellows captains and him already aware it was unreasonable to expect the plans to be able to be put into effect straight away. And then depending on their decision will depend on who on the list is offered a chance to train with us. In Naruto? Jiraiya asked, his voice taking on a worried tone. He gets a place no matter what, we've grown attached to the little brat and no doubt the brats and him will be as think as the Ives before the week's out. Zeph said, already imagining the headaches ahead for them. Good, and seeing how my spy network is as ready as it can be, I can stay more often to help the Gaki. Make sure he has someone to actually look after him instead of seeing him every 6 months. Jiraiya said, startling Hiruzen at the speed he had set up, having expected him to be at it for at least another 5 years at least. How? Incentive. Roger answered, briefly showing the scroll that the Yondaime Hokage had given him. The night he had died, causing the Cage to sweat drop. And lots of it. It's settled then, the children will enter at the start of the new semester in a week's time alongside the other children in the junior academy, and when the new program is ready they and some of their fellow students will join your training program. Hiruzen said finally. Now I simply pray they're better behaved than your son is. He said tiredly, looking at Roger who was grinning widely. The chances of that are about as likely as you finding a replacement Hokage soon, especially with our arrival festival being tomorrow. Whitebeard snorted as a crash could be heard in the distance, followed by a roar of Luffy, as a giggling black-haired blur flew past the window with a blonde-haired boy in a suit hot on his heels. I think I need a drink, Hiruzen said wearily. I think we all do. The three captains muttered as one. *1 sword style. 36 Screams of Purgatory. Hope you guys enjoy first part of this story. Do like, share and subscribe.